oh look, somebody's here. I was beginning to think I was crazy. I'm like, it's Tuesday, right? Like it was a long weekend and stuff, but I don't know. And of course,
sometimes if you hop forward in the book, you're going to miss some key things.
mm,
Why am I getting all these errors?
right? Yeah.
Was,
Oh, good, and Dean's here too. I just had the longest 4 minutes of my life. Like, what do I do if nobody comes? Do I pretend there's people here? Because I'm kind of dialogic in my teaching. Like, I couldn't just talk at that for 3 hours, believe it or not. What's that?
Sam point blank says he prefers having no students.
Oh, really?
As he then always follows that line up with, means no difficult questions.
Well, that's true. Which is rough when you schedule the first half of your class to be questions.
Speaking of questions,
Yeah.
since this is Q&A,
Right?
so I assume the test is just validation stuff that only applies if when we run the test. Doesn't apply anywhere else in the code, or?
Well, it depends on what kind of test you're talking about. If you're talking about unit tests, then those are tests on the model or on the models. We'll do other tests that are for the controllers and still other tests that will actually reach into the views and make sure that the view is returning the structure that we expect, that we can even evaluate to see that the styles are being applied correctly and all of that. So we're going to build up testing over time. This week I've saved tests for Wednesday. And it says functional and unit tests, but it's going to be mostly unit tests, depending on how far we get with the controllers.
I mean, I got it done and mostly working, but I can definitely tell I'm going to have to reread that chapter a couple of times just
Right.
to actually learn it.
Right. And there was one test in Rails 5.1 that kept failing despite the book. Did you get that? There was a failure. You may have fixed the fixtures. Let me pull down my...
No, there was one I couldn't get working, so that was probably it.
One moment.
I just kind of got tired of asking for help and being because my mind
Well,
didn't ask too long.
but you're the only person who's going to like get a solid grade for those questions, right? Basecamp, and I'm going to say this loudly into the camera for everybody who's not here, 40% of your grade is Basecamp activity. Okay? So when it's quiet for 5 days in a row, that's a really bad thing. So don't be embarrassed that you're doing the right thing by asking lots of questions.
because I was looking back at your questions and like, oh, I should have asked that question. I read
So.
Right, so no, there's no such thing as too many questions. There's no such thing as...
Hopefully me trying to liven up a little bit with the joke, though.
I was actually telling that joke to a student of mine today. So highly
Jokes are always good. Okay.
The questions I have are a little more discussion-oriented. I could force them there, I guess.
I would like it if you did, because then it helps me, because I'm coming in this morning cold. I have no idea, other than a couple little problems, what anybody was struggling with. So if there's a discussion like, oh, everybody's tripping up over this, then I know to do a little bit of work to prep that. Because again, we've only got 6 weeks in here. But like I posted, this is a full 16-week course that we're smushing down. So we've got a lot of material to cover, and we don't necessarily have the luxury of time. I will be happy to answer your email in 8 or 10 weeks about a particular problem that you're having, but we want to try to make it part of the class. And of course, you know, having Basecamp nearby or open as you're writing your code and as you're reading the book is a really good idea so that you can pop in, even if it's just to the chat room or something with a question. So let's see, Stali. I'm just pulling down my copy of the repository. Oh, I've got a aphid on my hand. Tried to bite me. Okay, let's see.
So in an actual environment, you want to use like a copy of production, correct? Not the actual production, obviously, but like a copy of it. Sorry.
Hold on a second. I was too busy minding my password manager.
No.
Okay, there we go. We shouldn't have any more problems anymore. Okay, so start again.
So in a like a database and not use your own made-up data?
It depends. I mean, if you're talking about an app that's really huge, it will probably be unfeasible to pull in an entire copy of the production database, but it also depends on what you're doing. If you're doing stress testing and load testing and things like that, then yeah, you want to have an environment that is, to the degree possible, replicated on your desk. And of course, if you've got, right, so just so everybody's sort of on the same page, so you have your dev machine, right, which we'll draw a little keyboard in front of because it might be a laptop or something like that. And then we have our production server stack, which of course will do the universal stack of servers for production. But if you've got a more complex setup, you can actually have also some kind of staging server too, which usually makes smart before you go up to production. So you can do things like test your full-on deployment environment. If we're lucky, when we get to that last week with deployment and things like that, we'll look at ways that you can virtualize a tiny little server that'll let you simulate some of the things in production. But one of the points of Rails is that it's supposed to be, to the degree possible, more or less operating system neutral, as long as you've got some sort of POSIX-style system. Yes, Tarun?
Three questions.
Sure.
Maybe multiple parts to them. So first question is, would it be possible to extend the deadline to 6/14, the Wednesday when class?
6/14.
So that it would give us an opportunity to work entire weekend long and then ask questions at the beginning class. And
You said the magic words that make my ears happy when you say work the weekend long. Sure. Okay, so let's do that. Let me make that commit right now. So Tarun has asked for an extension on the project from June 11th to June 14th. So let's go into,
I'm assuming all deadlines are 11:59.
yeah. I can be a little loosier-goosier in a class of 8 or 9 people versus a class of 60. My quality of life isn't going to suffer too much, but just for the sake of meeting the deadline and so I can dive right in and start commenting on stuff. Okay, so let's see. So let's pull that, and come on, why every morning it's like, Adam, I've never heard of Adam before. Fine. See, this is why I love BB Edit, because it never fails me. It sticks around. Okay. So let's see. We've got a spot on the calendar that talks about the... Where are we at? Wow, we're already in week 3. Okay, project due 11:59 p.m. and now we want to say the 14th, that's Wednesday? Okay. All right, so Wednesday, 6/14. And let's jump into the projects page and change the deadlines there so as to avoid any confusion. Due Wednesday, June 14th. I don't know if I've got any. All right, we can change. Well, let's see. One week of June 12th, so let's move that to week of June 19th. With the caveat, or earlier, if at all possible. Just so people get feedback and we can have discussions about the work in a timely fashion. Okay. And I don't think there's any mention of dates here. Okay. Now, that being said, the second project's July 2nd due date is pretty much a non-negotiable, just because the semester literally ends and I literally have to submit grades. So we can definitely move this one back, but this other one, just by the nature of this wacky 6-week course, that's how it's going to be. There's Isabel. Okay, so let's make a commit so it's official. Okay, Isabel, so Tarun asked that we move the project 1 due date back to Wednesday instead of Sunday. And the first one, yes. So I'm making a commit with that. All right. Move alpha.
I was hoping nobody would.
Yeah, one Weisenheimer in the room like, no, we wouldn't have it due Sunday. 1 due date to 6/14. All right. All right, so we'll push that up, and I will. Oh. Live is what goes actually up on the public-facing web server, but apparently I never added that remote to here, so I'm just going to SSH into my box at home. Do this the long way. And I will pull the latest copies down there. There we go. And now I can do git push live master from my box at home.
So what's the difference between origin master and live?
Nothing. They are just. Let me wait for this thing to finally decide that it's going to cooperate, and I'll show you. When we have words like origin and live or production or staging or dean or whatever you want to call it, that's just a shortcut marker so that you don't have to type in this whole long string of things. By default, or not even, well, by default, but also by convention. So if I do git remote v, for example, on my copy of the course repository on my computer back in Logan Square, so I've got origin, which is where I keep all the source on GitHub, but then I've also got this live, which is my actual web server where I host all that stuff. So rather than FTPing things around or whatever, just I've got Git set up on my server, and then it uses something called Git hooks, which just grabs a copy of that repository and then basically writes it over the top of whatever's there. Which, the long and short of that is that if we reload this thing now, we should see, there we go. Do 11:59 p.m. Wednesday, 6/14. Right? Git is a gateway drug. You start using it, and then you want to use it for everything. Okay, next question.
So in terms of going through the exercises, the book has really been good in explaining things, and then the .ri tool. So that's why I guess I've been quiet on Basecamp in terms of that. So I have more of these questions on when they talked about, okay, we do validation, okay, they had a discussion and I looked up some stuff on, why validation shouldn't be done in a controller or why it's done in a model. So I guess that's my question is, why validation goes in the model? It seems like an action to me. Shouldn't that have a validation controller or a validation helper in their Ruby files to help you validate your model? Because my understanding was a model would be just a simple class or something that just gives structure to your data.
So there's a couple of things to that. I will write some of them on the board. One of my favorite sort of like pairings that you hear about in Ruby, there's a famous post by, I think, Jameis Buck called Fat Models and Skinny Controllers. All right? And yes, you're right. Validation does seem like an action, but if we think about the whole model stack, right, what is ignoring validations, ignoring everything, like what is our model? What is its primary job? Like what is it doing?
Represent data.
Okay, it represents data. And in Rails, it knows how to talk to our data store, right? So a lot of this stuff gets lumped together with business logic, right? That our model should understand everything about our data, right? Which is another point, and we'll get to this certainly with models this week. We're going to do more with validations on Wednesday and kind of tightly couple them with unit tests. But one of the advantages to putting all of our validation, or more generically, our rules about our data in the model, is that we can have any number of controllers that talk to our model. So if we were to stick validation inside of our controller, like let's say, okay, when somebody updates their profile, the update method in our controller is going to check to make sure that they're not using any numbers in their username or whatever. We could do that, but then the second you have another model or another controller out there that wants to do that same thing, you're then responsible for coordinating those distinctions.
Couldn't you just create a helper? I know that I saw like helpers where you can write Ruby code.
Sure.
A bunch of helper methods that would help validate whatever you need, and then they can be reused across any controller.
Right, and we'll see that. There are ways that you can write your own classes and actually bring them right into your models so that you can do that. So, and there is an entire group. We're probably not going to hit them because they're a little bit too hard, but for your own research and edification, there's this whole thing called concerns, which are kind of like a superclass of model. They understand certain things that are shared across different models. So you're absolutely right. There may be certain kinds of business logic that we spread out, but generally speaking, we want the orbits of our business logic to stay pretty tightly with our model, even if that's something like a concern or a special class that we're using to validate the data, right? If we had some very complex data we were doing, let's say we decided to build some kind of an app that was going to check the integrity of Git repositories or something, right? We would need something that would be able to check the integrity of this SHA-1, for example. That is probably beyond what we would do in a simple model validation, right? We would need something that would need to look at the files, look at the commits, be able to do all that stuff. So in that case, yeah, we would probably extract all of that out into its own class and then bring that into our model to do that more advanced kind of thing. We're going to probably be playing it a little bit safer and simpler in this class with simple validations like, is there a piece of input where we expect one? Is it alphanumeric when we expect it to be alphanumeric? Things like that.
Gotcha. So I guess in this tight coupling of the business logic with the model, is that a common pattern in various implementations of other MVC frameworks?
I can't speak to other ones. The one that I know the very best is Rails, and I can tell you that in Rails, yes, that's generally what you're doing. And that does, in principle, that's the whole point of having a distinct model from a controller. If you wanted to, we could imagine some kind of framework where we have like model and controller kind of lumped together in a big pile. We'll make it look sloppy and gross, right? With a view over here, right? And you see this on particularly older versions of a lot of PHP frameworks where the thing, right? And again, what's our controller doing? What's its responsibility?
To interact with the model. And
okay, so it dispatches things to the model, right? I need this line of data, or I need this collection of data or something. And of course, it's listening for things that are happening with the views, which is usually our user who's doing something, right? If we're doing something programmatically with our Rails app, right, we have a nightly backup or something, we might have a controller that we interact with programmatically rather than one that's necessarily associated with a view, right? So yes, you can mix these things together, but sort of the point of model view controller architecture is that they're not together, that they are separate, distinct parts that have clearly defined responsibilities. We don't want our model to say, oh, when somebody asks to reset their password, they should get this view. That's not the model's job. The controller is in charge of that. Oh, someone wants to reset their password, so then it dispatches something to the model, right? It puts a temporary hash in place, it emails them, it does all those other things, and the controller then says, hey, show the view that says, hey, go check your email, and then they'll click that link that comes into their email, and then boom, they're talking to the controller again. Like, ooh, we've got a link that somebody's clicked to reset their password. Let's check the hash in that email against what's in the database. It kicks back, and now we've got another view where somebody can enter their password that they want to actually use now, or to reset it, or whatever it is that they're doing.
So the model would be in charge of sending that, or storing the reset or the temp hash. I get that. Would it also be responsible for sending the email out?
No, it will use Action Pack, which is a task runner that we've got that we can run with Rails. Again, we're going to see how far we can get the next 2 weeks to see if we can do this stuff with email and all of that. I'm mostly concerned that we get like sort of the basics of model view controller done. But so yeah, and we would probably in our model, like we would do something like def self reset password or something, right? We would have that in our controller, and then this would have all the logic that would say that we're doing there. All right. And that may or may not be a class method. It kind of depends on how we've got the whole thing structured. But the controller knows what it's supposed to do. The model knows how it's supposed to do it, and in some weird understanding of the word why, like why it's supposed to do it. Humans are still better at the why, but.
I guess in Ruby, is the goal to keep, I was reading in, some people said that the goal is to keep the models and the controllers as short as possible, or as...
The controllers certainly should be as short as possible. If you find yourself writing a lot of logic in your controller, it's time to take a step back and figure out if you shouldn't be doing that with a model. I'll give you an example of that. In my own Rails developing career, I was working on a web application for the Newberry Library, and they were interacting with their account on Zotero, which is a citation management software. And they basically wanted to, I forget exactly what they were doing, but they wanted to check the integrity of their title in the app against their Zotero database. And so I ended up writing this controller action that was like check Zotero, and it was probably like 80, 90 lines long, like huge. That should have been one line, check Zotero, and then the model would have had all of that logic embedded in it. So all that the controller was doing is say, hey, model, fire this particular method for me, or this set of methods, or whatever. So that's, again, where we talk about fat models and skinny controllers.
So it would go in the model. I would think it would break off into its own helper or library where you would interact with Zotero, and then the model can invoke that and then give that back to the controller.
Possibly, but the thing to remember is that, like, if we look at a verbose, right, when we don't have that set thing, in some controller, right, we're in a controller here. What we'll usually have is something like at users equals user dot all, right? This is a very standard kind of pattern for an index kind of action where we want to see all of that stuff. So what we're doing is we're saying, hey, just go find this user class, aka user model, and run this all method on it, right? And if we get more, and this will get complicated more with what we'll do with associations, but if we wanted to, right, we could do another call here at pets is equal to pet all, right? And now, within this controller, which we don't know where this controller is in the application. It's just a controller. All we know is that this particular index method is going to grab all of our users and it's going to grab all of our pets, right? So that means that we can, by virtue of this syntax, we can call upon any model to do our bidding from within any controller that we can imagine, now or in the future, right? Which is helpful if we've got some kind of like administrative controller to handle people who are abusing our system or something like that. Like, we can step in and do things that may not be permissible on the regular user side controller like that. If we keep all of that logic in our model, then we don't have to worry about, is this an administrator? Is this a regular user? Are they coming in over JSON? Are they using our web site? We don't have to worry about that stuff because all of the logic and all the capabilities of the model are kept with the model itself.
Cycle, and there were just a bunch of methods I remember that were used to kind of do regular tasks that we would kind of usually put if-elses around and do some logic around. So I really like that. How do we know what's out there? Like, where do I go and look this up? Unless they tell me.
Sure.
Because I guess it seems like not a lot of resources or questions have been asked about this yet, at least in Stack Overflow. So I'm guessing we have to go.
Yeah, okay, so thank you for this question. This is a really good one. So Rails guides, this to me is usually my jumping off point with Rails. It's where I jump off before I go diving into the API documentation. It's where I jump off when I'm prepping for class to just remember that I've got everything. So it's not always the most well-organized thing in the world. But if we go to views, right, so we've got this sort of overview, and you'll see work in progress, things like that. Here's one that's specifically about form helpers, right? So we have different helpers that are here. Let's see. Could swear there was another document here about helper methods, but there's not. All right. Okay, these are helper methods on the controller, but that's not going to help us terribly.
That's the issue I ran into.
Right.
Find what to search store in Google to find this list, or where do I go
Right.
to? It's like jumping to the source itself.
Right, and we don't want to do that, yeah.
Class and package and module. So.
All right, so this is the overview for, okay, what helpers are provided by ActionView. Here we go. Okay, so good. So yeah, here is a starter list, right? So we've got for full list, see the API documentation. All right, so there is this whole helpers module within here, right? So asset URLs. So if we want to call upon our JavaScript, that doesn't even seem to link to the right place. This is ugly. All right, so here's number helper. Okay, so yeah, this is better how to so we've got a list of modules down here that we've got. All right, so here's where we can actually go to like asset tag helper. There we go. Now we're actually seeing this stuff. So for example, if we want an image tag in Rails, we can call upon this image tag helper, pass it a path to an image, and then it will output an actual image tag there. Okay.
So yeah, so another issue I ran into with this,
Mm-hmm.
these methods are very loud. They're not graceful. I would expect them to be because they didn't show the alternate text. If I didn't have an image, suppose I give
Mm-hmm.
it an invalid image path and the image is deleted now, and I have alternate text set. In
Right.
HTML, it'll show the alternate text. Like this was a picture of a dog, or this
Right.
was a picture of a book. Here, image tag doesn't do that. Like it like throws an exception saying can't find this asset in the asset pipeline.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a different issue. For sure. I was going to say that there are ways that we can pass in different arguments here, right, where we can use this options hashes to put in different things,
Right.
although I'm not seeing anything specifically here about alt text, but we should be able to do that as well. Yeah, that's new in Rails 5.1. This was what I was actually starting with earlier. This commit. So let's see. So if I jump back to, although I think I did my commits out of order. Let's do git show C78 BEDD. Right? So I was getting that same error when I was running the unit tests in the book. It was complaining about my string, not in the asset pipeline. So I went in and then changed this to that rails.png image. So this is a new whiny asset pipeline that we've got that's not just, like you say, quietly failing and saying, oops, can't find the image or throwing a 404. Now, the things that we would need to investigate to figure out that is, one, is there a way to just simply override that behavior someplace? Like, is there a silent method that we can do on the asset pipeline? And then the second is that same behavior exhibited when we're in production? Because Rails is incredibly verbose, incredibly noisy when we're in development about errors. Whereas when we're in production, it tends to be a little bit more tight-lipped. So we'd have to read the documentation. We'd need to look further and see. And then, of course, we can always test by firing up Rails server in production with a fully seeded database with those assets and see what happens when we try to call upon an asset that doesn't actually exist.
And I got our same error of secrets or something, so I didn't look much into that. I'm guessing we need to send a token or something.
Yeah, there's a configuration file that we would need to add.
So, okay, I can look at that later. Okay, all right. So go to the guide and then jump into.
Yeah. So, and I jumped right into the API documentation here. It can usually be more helpful to go in, look through, and see what what helpers they are actually covering here, right? So these are all asset ones up here.
Yeah, because unless they told me, I wouldn't know.
Right.
The cycle exists. I would.
Exactly.
My own implementation of how do I cycle these tags
right.
for the class.
Right. And that's part of learning this or any other framework is learning, and that's why I'm such a documentation hound in class. That yeah, it's good to have a book. Yeah, it's good to have a professor who can tell you certain things. But I know that what I know about Rails is still only a small slice of it. Just like you could bring me the dictionary of the English language and there would be plenty of words you could point to that I had no idea existed, right? So it's good to, the best thing that I can say about, for something like cycle, right, which does something on every other turn, is to ask yourself whether your problem that you're trying to solve is something that somebody else has probably tried to solve before. If they have, it's worth scouring that documentation a little bit more carefully. And of course, my opinion is that it is very rare to come across a problem that someone hasn't tried to solve before. Now, whether that then goes the next step and actually becomes part of the Rails core or whatever other framework it is you're using, that's the $64,000 question. And that's part of the reason that for the graduate students in particular, going and reading through I understand that that's an onerous task, right? But that's part of the way you do it. I hope you also notice that at the back of our book, every single one of those modules is covered in its own chapter, so you might start reading there. But going through these kinds of things, that it's not a straight up tutorial, but it's also not just a simple API reference, can give you a sense of the kinds of things that are available there. Right? Dean.
So this is more for my specific project.
Okay, can we make sure that before we change subject that Tarun is all set to go, that he doesn't have anything else following up?
So now leading into the next, or I guess the final part of what I had was basically, as we go through these books and in class, I'm understanding all the different components and kind of the philosophy of Rails, convention over configuration, like let me do a lot of black magic for you. So it's like, if I'm going to start my alpha app, I honestly am lost. Like, where do I start? Do I run scaffold? Like, professional people avoid using scaffold. So I would like to do it in a professional way so that if I go for a job and they're not laughing at me for using scaffold, then
You've made my morning, because your question means that you're ready what we're going to do today, which is to talk about models and sort of like how all of that stuff fits together.
Yeah, because how to create manually, I don't even know
Right.
unless I manually
Right.
copy the same format.
Yep.
Defining routes, should I manually do that? Because I don't see routes for when you generate the scaffold. They're all loaded in as symbols, I read.
Right.
And then attributes and models and etc. The models are empty now, and that just shocks me, because it's like, what am I looking at? What am I even validating? Right.
Yeah, that's where things go conventional to the point of kind of maddening silence. So yeah, we're going to look at a bunch of stuff that you just mentioned today. So we're going to look at, I don't know if I need to say anything more about ORM, but as we go, but I'm going to talk about bespoke data structures and the primacy of models, right? If nothing else on your alpha app works, your controllers are all messed up, your views aren't doing what they're supposed to, as long as you have a model that is modeling your data, and it's an accurate representation of whatever little world it is that you're working with, I'm not worried about anything else, right? Because that's where a lot of this stuff starts. We're going to look specifically at models and migrations, right? And kind of how Rails really wants to bend you to its will in terms of any kind of database change needs to be a migration, right? We can't just open up that schema RB file and start hacking away at it. There needs to be a migration behind it. And then we're going to look at models and associations and talk about that, because most of our models do not live in a vacuum, right? In almost any kind of user-facing system, there is a user's model, and then it has other kinds of things that sort of float around it. All right, so that's kind of where we're heading today with all that stuff. Before we go there, though, let's see what. Are you done? Yes. Okay, cool. Good. You asked the exact right question. You came to the right class today, because that's where we're going next, is talking about sketching this stuff out. Dean.
So, short version is with my project, I have a couple friends who kind of do this thing on a volunteer basis for gaming all play. So I figure if we can computer program, I can do it for them. So, and I also have in my mind, I think I got this from Java class, that you want to use a copy of production when possible, so I had them give me a old version of it, with the little spreadsheet they get. It's 547 lines long.
Sure.
I'm like, is there an easy, do you know of an easy way to copy like the spreadsheet to the little test database? Because I don't want to use
Yeah, actually what I would probably do is you can export most spreadsheets as comma separated values, right? Drooly, low level, ancient way of serializing data. And then you can usually, there are utilities, and I believe there's even a few gems out there that will convert comma-separated value into YAML, right? And then you can use YAML in different ways. Or you can just build hashes based on your YAML or something like that. But I wouldn't try to work with all 500 lines of that. Maybe figure out 5, 10 representative ones and go from there. Isabel or Kelly, do you have questions?
Had a crazy thing happen in the task B beginning, where I was trying to do the products, and it kept loading twice. Like I would get it copied twice, and I looked all over the views, and I couldn't figure out why. Everything I did, it duplicated twice on the page.
Huh. Do you have a repository?
I do, but it's kind of a mess.
That's okay. As long as we can find if you can post in Basecamp your file,
Sure.
then we can take a look at that together.
Duration be 1 or 2?
I think it was back. And maybe this is something I can ask about Basecamp later.
That's fine. I would like to kick off the day by looking at some code too.
And this author is very, Sam Ruby, I think, wrote in the initial chapter. He's very good at explaining things like you never dealt with Ruby or
Right.
whatever. So I like that, so that you really get an idea of what he's doing.
Yep, for sure. No, there's a reason that this book is sort of like the official book that you should learn Rails from.
It may take me a while to find this.
That's okay.
Continue on.
Yeah, well, the one thing I was going to show, not that, let's see. I wanted to show that thing that I got that was the error from the book. No, I can't find mine. There we go. Yeah. So let's see. So let me see if I can do this. So I'm going to just do, and here's a good example of using branch. So I'm going to just check out a branch called error. All right, and okay, so that I've got this not in book commit. And what I'm going to try to do here is actually, let's see if I can just revert that commit. Git commit revert C7 8 BEDD. If you've ever heard of the git commit, I did not match any file yet. You're right, git revert. I don't know where commit came from. Git revert commit, but we can just do that. Every day I come back, it's like, I don't know.
Do you mind if I close the door?
You want to close the door? That's fine.
Louis is reaching across the hall. My mind keeps trying to pay attention to what he's saying.
This early?
Okay, so let's try this one more time.
Right across the hall.
This early in the morning?
Come in.
4:40.
Okay, git revert. My local changes would be over. Oh, okay, so it's caught mid. All right, let's do git reset head. Oh my God! Every day. No tool for you. Okay, one more time with filling. So let's try to revert this. Okay, now we should be getting a message, revert not in book. Okay, so this reverts commit. So what this should do, and we can double check it, okay, so if I do L app test, oh, that's right, I've got depot app test, not app test, test. Fixtures. So by default, when we create this new products model, we get this. And I've still got the one where I put in the fixture data that's from the chapter we're calling on this Ruby thing. But these were the culprits on that test. So if I run, and what's nice about this is I've reverted just that one commit, but I did everything else. So if I do rake test.
Another thing I found out is they've replaced all the rake tasks with Rails.
You can still use rake if you want to. I'm old school, and I always like to use the rake.
Yeah.
To which my students have in the past like made fun of me, like, it's just Rails now. I'm like, no, it's Rake. Because I get in a different mindset when I call on Rake than when I call on Rails. So this was the test that was failing. Although this is interesting because this is an asset. Ruby ping is not present in the asset pipeline.
I got like a my string error, like my string.
Yeah, that's what I was getting to. Which is funny because there it is. Yeah, this is a slightly different error. Good Lord, test fixtures. All right. Yeah, no, it's wondering about that. Okay, so that one's working just fine. So we're trying to test these controllers. Although you know what the problem is here? Is that I don't think I have but that's a lie because we just saw that file. Oh, it's right. There's a Rails.ping. So this is going to be all kinds of ugly, although this will be some good Git action here. Okay, so we need to go and change that fixture. Actually, let's just do atom./ here. Okay, so jump into our fixtures. Okay, Rails.png. Okay, so first let's fix that. I got too many things that are gray. All right. Okay, yeah, this is the error I was getting. So now it's moved on, and so it's freaking out about my string being not present in the asset pipeline, and that has to do with the fixtures being loaded up automatically on the test. So the way that I patched that was the topic of this commit, which was to add that. But before I go back and fix that, let me make a correction here that I'm going to actually bring back. Right? So I need to go back. Whoop. Okay, so here I've corrected this. So this is actually a good commit. So I'm going to say git add dot. I'll use my shortcut since now I've published all those things. Correct reference to rails.png. Okay, now this is actually a good commit that I want to bring over to my master branch, because if I check out master right now and run rake test, I should still be getting a failure. Yeah. So now I can do a quick git cherry pick. All right, now I've pulled over this corrected reference, and now if I run my tests again, there we go. So overconfident committing on my part. I'm like, ah, sweet, I solved the problem.
And you fixed the my string issue here on the student, right?
Right, because on master I've got the commit that I reverted over there. So the specific commit for that. And I'm trying to do this. This is the first like major thing that I've hit, but I'm trying to prefix commits where it says not in book. So if I do git show C78 bed, right? So here's where I converted those my strings into images that actually then in turn exist in that asset pipeline. And like I say, this is something that is new in Rails 5.1, that it's being that cautious about our fixture data, that it's looking to see that we've actually got the thing that we're calling upon in the view. So once that all is put together, then yeah, I'm able to run rake test and everything passes. And again, we're going to do more with tests on tomorrow. Boy, I sure wish I had more coffee. Mainlined it into my neck this morning. Okay, so Dean, did we get through your question? Okay. And Kelly, you had a, oh, that's right, that's what we were doing. You posted it. Okay, cool. Let's have a look. Okay. Okay, so now what specifically is being
Just for some
duplicated?
reason, it's like the whole thing's being duplicated twice.
Okay.
I'll get like new product, new product.
Okay, so you're getting that when you go to the new action?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So I just couldn't figure out why it was repeating itself twice.
Right. So there's our new
New product, yeah.
view. Let me double check my own here. Nope. Everything's gray. I can't find it. I don't want that. I don't want that. There we go. All right, so let's go app, views. Isn't that funny? It's exactly the same, isn't it?
Do you see two new product buttons or links? Or?
You just thought, I mean, it repeats it perfectly.
Oh, the entire form
The
is
entire
twice?
form is repeated twice. I just couldn't figure out where I managed to do that.
Gesundheit. Well, let me
I'll go back.
let me show you what I will do when I get these kinds of questions over the weekend at home. Oh, just need some more context clues. All right, there we go. So we can do git clone. So I can get Kelly's work here. Actually, I should move this to Kelly so I know who I'm talking about. All right. So if I run rake db migrate, okay, it doesn't like that. It's probably because you've got an in. Yeah, go ahead and get into the demo directory. Here we go. Okay. Let's do our bundle install then. Okay, it doesn't like about your older version of bundler. Okay, so one more time, rake db migrate. Cool. I don't know if you've got any seed, but let's do rake db seed here. Okay. Now it looks like you have not yet committed your schema.rb file. So I'm going to just make a note. Kelly should commit her schema file. Okay. You're not going to ever see these changes because I can't push them back to your, I mean, you'll see them as I'm doing them here. Oh, right, exactly, yeah. I struggle with that, like ethically as a teacher, like, do I jump in and do this, but then does it look like I'm doing the student's work? And so it's probably better for me to just like reference a commit on my repository. Okay, so now if we do rake db seed, if in case Kelly's got any seed data. All right, so now I'm just going to try firing up Rails server here. And I'll go to, this is not the browser I want. Go to localhost 3000 products.
You know, I got into 14 and got all kinds of crazy.
But this is demos, right? Demos have products?
Is that not what the?
I thought Depot had products. Demos had like say hello and stuff.
Well, I think.
Chapter 2, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I may have committed in the wrong place.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think I need to go back.
Like say hello.
Or hold on, did I may have fired up Rails server in the wrong place.
That was in chapter, like.
Okay, so there must be something that you've not, unless we've got a task B branch.
And that's where I have the depot.
Oh, okay.
Is that where the issue is, or no?
I think, you know what, I need to just.
Well, let's see what we can figure it out. All right, so. No route matches get products. So it doesn't make any sense if you've got those files, unless you skipped over running those migrations, right?
I think I ran this migration. I'm going to just go back and redo it.
Yeah, this is empty.
Okay.
But how did you have that? That doesn't make sense to me, how you could have that be empty. Okay, that was on your task B branch, so we know that much is true. Huh, isn't that funny? It's all here. So, you know what? I checked out her branch the incorrect way.
Oh, you created your own.
I created my own.
That's okay. That makes sense.
Awful master.
Right. So I want to do git. First, I'll do git fetch, which will tell me when I do remote v, and then git branch A will tell me all of the branches it knows about, including your task B. So what I have to do is git checkout B task B origin task B. So I tell it to track from that remote. You don't have to do that on your own machine, but I have to do it here. All right, so let's one more time with feeling do that. All right, so let's do rake db migrates. Should actually probably do a rake db reset. Cool. All right. Now what is there?
I'm still missing the schema.
Yeah, that's funny that that's still not there.
I think there is no migration file.
Yeah, maybe I just.
You didn't do the migration file. Okay, so that's gonna.
That's gonna be the problem.
That is gonna be a problem.
I'll go back.
Okay, yeah, you want to commit that stuff and make sure that it's all up there. Yeah. And it's just hard to say then without having that there, like, yeah, why we don't have. So we've got a product. The last place we can check if you're seeing double of something, although a controller should only be loading up a view once, right?
Unless you explicitly call render or something.
Right. So we've got product new, which we expect. Nope, not that one. So we have this form partial. It does not appear to be duplicating anything.
Okay, I'll just go back.
Okay. All right. Yeah, do make sure you're committing everything. That'll make it easier to track stuff down. Okay. I want to dive into, well, first let me clear out some of this stuff. So I want to dive into models and query languages and things like that, but it's also 5 minutes to 11, so I think let's take a 5 to 7 minute break early here, and then we'll come back and we'll dive into the first of the bit on the models. If that works for everybody? Okay. And I've already got my branch all set up to go. We're doing the model extravaganza, so we'll come back and
Like, you would show us from like 1.2 to Rails new, like
that's where my that's
Excellent.
where yeah.
Yes,
I'll
where I'm
walk
lost.
through that.
Like,
Sure.
Because it creates everything for you, and
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we'll do. All right, we're gonna step outside.
going to be yet.
The simple data, like employee database. Yeah, and then if we have to have something associated, I was thinking have an address associated with each employee. Like that's it. I'm not trying to do anything complex. I'm not gonna try and bite off more than I can chew. Because I'm like I said, I have no idea without running scaffold what the heck to do. Like the model's blank. Like this is the first time I'm seeing an MVC application where the model is blank. Yeah, Rails does things very differently.
Oh yes, it does. I like declaring what kind of variables there are. I
Agreed.
know exactly what I'm working with.
Agreed.
I
Exactly.
don't like having to just blindly trust Rails.
Everything is loaded as symbols. That's why we have to use colon and name. Like I hate that because everything is internal.
It's too abstract for my taste.
Yeah, agreed. Same.
What kind of app are you doing? Is your project different because it's 513?
No, same alpha app.
Same
You just have to
alpha
do the
app.
SME.
But I hate coding things just for class. It drives me crazy. So I always do a better job and thus get a better grade when I code for something that I actually am interested in.
Yeah.
So my friends had this issue for the video game we play. So I'm like, oh, I'll see if I can do something like that. Of course, I had to talk to them to scale it back several notches. Like, okay, here's the MVP, viable product, and you get this working, then we can go to the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So basically, the short version is I played this game called Ingress, which I assume you've heard of the terribleness of Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
We're the ones who found all the spots.
Oh, really?
Yes, we created all the spots. There's actually some spots on campus that I was the one who submitted them.
Oh, really?
Yes. More towards the south of the campus, though.
Oh, okay.
So,
What do you mean by spots? Like the more spots? Or what do you
the
mean?
gym or Pokemon
Oh, the gym.
Pokestops, stops, they're portals in Ingress. They just copy and paste it.
Oh, okay.
It's all in Ingress, not an ING fit Pokemon Go.
Uh-huh.
So, same thing with Ingress, they have to physically move around. So with Ingress, instead of catching Pokemon, you create control fields, they're called, and basically is you connect 3 spots together in a triangle, but the links between portals can never cross.
Okay.
So because of that little rule, getting bigger the field, the more points you get to your team.
Right.
Because of that rule, fields that cover different states become very difficult and very, like 100 plus people to coordinate. Because if you have one link right between 2 things, it doesn't matter that you're trying to throw a bigger link, it'll deny it.
Yeah.
So you get these whole massive operations and all sorts of craziness, which is quite fun and enjoyable. But because of that, people develop the need to literally move keys around. But so in order to get a key to a pole, you have to like physically be at the pole to get the key. So if I want to throw a link to California, either A, I need to go to California and find the key, or someone needs to come from California to me and get it from California, and then give it to you here in Chicago. So moving this all nonsense around, it's like there's a form for a big event. They had like 500 lines, I think I told you, said in class. And I'm like, let me see exactly how many. Basically, I'm like, this is nonsense. Computer can do this. I had a little bit of trouble figuring out the logic for the connecting jumps, but I figured it out. Yeah, 547 lines.
I have a more important question now. Okay.
You finished.
Yeah, but okay. Are you planning on pursuing this as your final project?
If the group accepts it, yes.
Okay. Well, who likes doing front end development?
Do you?
No.
No.
Get it.
That's probably actually just going to have to be for once this class is done, is what I was probably going to figure out. Unless he wants us to do a fancy front end that blasts off like
Do you think like a reservation app would be like difficult? Like
Everything is difficult.
Yeah, you're right.
Everything to do right and with good quality and good unit tests around it and good integration tests around it is difficult.
Yeah.
So
I guess difficult wasn't the right word. I guess something that I could pull off in like a week.
it depends.
Yeah.
I'm doing something simple. I'm trying to hit the checklist. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah.
Hit the checklist reservation system, it's like this. I don't know how much he cares about functionality.
I don't think he, like he mentioned earlier, he doesn't really care too much about functionality,
So,
just as long as we have like the model. And
He mentioned last week, I think, that he knows this is alpha. He expects it to be broken.
Yeah.
He just more wants to see that we're learning and making progress. He understands this is a 6-week class.
I will try and avoid something broken. I'd much rather do something simpler and
That
not
works.
broken than,
I agree, but he also said he understands this is a 6-week class.
Right. So, yeah, he will definitely be more relaxed. Like, I think even if you're late, just let him know he should be fine. So, I mean, that's why I asked for the extension, because I was like, okay, this is a lot of work.
I need to catch up on just like the homework itself.
Tuesday, Wednesday, we have class, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday was due. And today we're learning how to actually do it from scratch without using scaffold.
What's scaffold? I didn't want to sound stupid.
That's fine. So basically, I read a little bit about it. The book doesn't necessarily describe it, but basically, a scaffold is a way for Rails to generate the conventional web application for you.
Okay.
So I have something written down. Pages.
I looked it up. I'm like, what's
Yeah, I did the same thing. So let's see, server.
Is that something that you read about in the book?
The book doesn't talk much about scaffold. Okay, there we go. So a scaffold is created for a given model, right? It generates the model, views, controllers, and migration for our database tables. So it is basically a generator for creating a conventional, because convention over configuration is their model. So it creates a conventional web application that's already wired up with everything. Hence, we don't see anything in the model. Hence, the controllers are so small. Hence, the routes are set up, but we don't see anything in the routes file, which just I don't like, but yeah.
Yeah.
So here, it's like, if you want to define a route, it's not going to magically work.
Yeah.
You have to create everything yourself. You have to be aware of the naming conventions that they use, right? Because the model needs to be named singular, and then the controller needs to be named like product underscore controller.
Yeah.
To be able to wire all of that up.
Okay.
And everything should need to be in the right folder. So the scaffold basically gives you a template of a web application, generates a template. It's a generator, and then I know.
And we're not gonna go that route, though, right?
You can.
Basically doing.
You can.
Is it harder though? Like, aren't we doing everything from scratch though?
I think that's better because you would at least understand what's going on. Yeah. And you can make changes incrementally and actually add it in yourself. Like if you want a time, like you can add the time yourself.
Yeah.
If you specify times in scaffold, you won't see anything in the model. I mean, you'll see something in the database in the migration, but not in the model.
Okay. God, it's nice outside. All right. So I'm going to, does anybody need to copy anything from up here? Because I'm going to erase all of it. Yeah. Assert difference.
So that was one of the test cases as part of iteration V2.
Since we're going to do tests tomorrow, do you want to just hang on to that question?
Sure.
Okay. Or you could post it to Basecamp too, and then I can make sure that I hit it. Okay. So when I'm starting to develop anything, an app, a website, this is my primary tool that I like to go to, just my notebook with some paper. So what I thought I would do to try to work through models today is to let's walk together through an app. And we're going to do an app that is near and dear to all students' hearts. We're going to do an app that gives students their schedules, right? What could be simpler? You just have some students and they have schedules and we just need to show them their schedules, right? So we're going to kind of walk through this and slowly see how it unravels when we try to do things this simple way. Lost the mic. Okay. So if we are doing an app for students and their schedules, what models are we going to need?
Student model.
Okay, students, right? And if you're bright and smart, you'll probably see we need another model as well. But let's pretend we think we can do all of this. We just need students, right? They've got schedules. No big deal, right? So database structures. If we want to just even think about this, like what if we've got a database with 10 rows, 1,000 rows, 2,000 rows, how do you even reliably pull a record out of a database? Like, what does every database table have?
A querying language.
It has a querying language, but even beyond that, how can we successfully get Isabel's record out of a database and not Dean's?
So have a unique ID.
Okay, we need a unique ID, right? And Rails gives us this for free, but it's important to not forget that every single table has a unique ID and that it is up to your database and its implementation to mind this unique ID, right? And if you've messed around with MySQL before, you know that you can insert a record and force the ID. Like if we say our first record is ID 1000, then the next record that comes in is going to be 1001. It's just going to skip. Well, it's not going to do a 0, but 1 to 999 is just going to skip, right? But we're going to not worry about that so much. So what information do we need about students in order to generate their schedule?
The name, their classes they're taking.
Okay, all right. So name, right? That I'm definitely on board for. It helps to have a student's name.
Well, now it just depends on the granularity. You can break it up into first name, middle name.
Okay, so then that becomes the next question. Do we want to do first name and last name when we talk about name, right? And then, of course, we can get into initials and middle names and all of that stuff. So, right? So we need some way to think about if we want to do first and last name. What else do we need for students? So Dean jumped right ahead to schedules. Is there any other quality about a student that we absolutely must have in order to display their schedule?
This is good enough. If we're looking at bare minimum, this is good enough. Yeah.
I would agree, right? So rule number one with your app is to remember that hot dog metaphor, right? What is the bare minimum thing that you need in order to model the piece of data in the world? Yes, there's tons of stuff that would be interesting to know. What year are they? You know, what's their birthday? You know, who's their advisor? All of this stuff. But in terms of like our end product, which is where we want to have, you know, Jane Q student and her schedule. And then we have some lines on the schedule we need to figure out, right? If this is what we're going for, the end product, then yeah, in terms of what we need to model for that student, it needs to be just her name. Now, schedule. How would we go about doing that? What is a schedule made up of? Okay, so would we do this? Course 1, course 2, course 3.
You can do that.
But yes, you absolutely could, and you will find horrible legacy and sometimes not legacy systems that try to do exactly this. What's the problem here, though? There's a couple of problems. What's the immediately obvious problem with this?
Too many columns.
Okay, there's too many columns.
Also, the student wants to he can overload.
Right. So we always will run, in this case, to the course n+1 problem, right? Where n is however many columns you've allotted in your database. There's always going to be one student that wants to take one more. What do we do for the student who's just going part-time and is only going to take one course? Are we just going to have these? So one of the things that is kind of a rule-ish in database design is you want databases that look more like or tables that look more like this than like this. right? You want to have a lot of contained records, and you don't want to go flying off and having a bunch of columns if you don't need that. What else? Like, let's say we did this, right? You have an instructor who's even dumber than I am, and oh, this is how you should do this. Well, what does a course record look like for this student? Right? If we're populating the database, we've got Jane Q student for the first name and last name. What does the course column look like?
It can be anything from like a hash syntax with comma-separated list.
Right? Yeah. So that's the other little hideous thing is when you find yourself doing like sort of miniature columns within a record, right? Oh, well, it's ITMD 413, and it meets, right? Because let's start fleshing out this next part. What do you need to have on a schedule? Must have, or it's not a schedule.
Time and start, time and end.
Okay, so we need a start time to end time.
And the name of the course and then the location.
Okay, so then we need a course name. I'm painting myself into a corner here. I'm going to shorten this. So we'll do a start to end. We'll do a location.
And dates.
Do we need dates?
Not really. It can be announced in class.
Right? I mean, does anybody like show up for the wrong first day of class because it wasn't printed on their schedule the way they expect? I mean, there's other way. I agree with you. That should probably be part of it. But if we're going with this kind of hot dog thing, right? And then we need to actually some kind of course identifier, right? ITMD 413 don't necessarily need to know that it's open source program. Don't need to necessarily know that Professor Stolly teaches it or whatever. Right? We need these three things, right? So this is where we start to get into the situation where we have multiple structured records like that. The question is, does everybody see what I'm doing here? We're trying to break this down. The question is have I just modeled a schedule? When I say there's a start time, a location, and a course ID, is that a schedule?
Model the course, which is a list. Well, you need that model too.
You need it, right? So this is one of those things where you want to really play with your data and see what it is that you're doing. Like, if you've moved, they just start with the products thing. Has anybody moved on in the book where they start doing the cart? No. Okay. When you get to that part of the book, they're going to say, oh, you have a shopping cart, right? Duh, what could be easier? Who hasn't bought stuff they don't need online all the time? Maybe this morning at breakfast, right? You have a shopping cart. And you want to think, oh, well, I'm going to put stuff in my cart. But what they've got is another model called line items. That actually, that's what your cart is made of. Your cart is more of a container for other things, right? Because again, so we're smart enough to know that we're not going to try to cram these courses into our student model. But if we start with our schedule model, we're going to quickly run into the exact same problem, right? Again, we'll have an ID, and then we've got course 1, right? And this could get ugly, location, and course 1, start, right? This gets really ugly really fast. So we have some other information that we need for schedule. So let's go to the far side here where we have, are we modeling courses?
Yeah.
Probably, right? So we could do, again, we've got an ID, we've got, we could just do, well, we probably wouldn't want to use that. We could do subject, and then we could just enforce some rules that say it has to be ITMD 413. Right? We could do separate subject and number columns if we wanted to. We need a start time, end time, and we need a location. All right? Now, what is the benefit? There is a benefit that's emerging from this. Right? Because if we think about just one student, Jane Q student, and her schedule, think about that early sketch where we started sticking her courses into here. What do we suddenly get when we abstract our courses out into its own model with its own set of records?
No need to repeat courses. Everybody can sign
Right.
the same.
Jane can be in a course, and Jack can be in a course, and Mike can be in a course, and Molly can be in a course, and we can refer to the same exact course record. We also suddenly, without being aware of it, can dump out a list of all of our courses that we offer ever, or if we come up with some other way to do this. So this is kind of what I love to do when I'm modeling things. Because if you're just in your head and you're like, oh, I'm going to do a course schedule thing, you're like, oh, we need to model students, we need to model their schedules, and everything's simple. And of course, we haven't written a single line of code yet, which is really nice, because you don't want to write 400 lines of code to discover what we have here with pen and paper, pen and whiteboard, or whatever, right? So what goes in this schedule?
ID.
Okay, we know we're going to have ID.
So now this gets tricky. Now we need to decide the level of normalization. If we're talking database class and
Right.
how we want to do this. Do we want to use one schedule table or have a schedule table and break off into a schedule and course association table?
Right. Okay, so Tarun, for those of you who didn't hear him at home, talking about normalization. Okay. Well, the question is do we have, what information might we have in this schedule table? Gesundheit.
So you're going to need an ID for the schedule, and you're going to need an ID of the student associated with that schedule, and have each unique schedule associated with.
Okay, so the first thing that Tarun is talking about is what is known as a foreign key, right? So one of the things we know we're going to need in this schedule table is the student ID, which matches up. Let me use some pretty colors here. So if you've not done database theory before, or if you've never done it from this side, right? So every student record has a unique ID that's enforced by the database. And then tables that want to reference that have what's known as a foreign key. And that's to say, if we see a schedule ID over here, this doesn't really matter, 27, and we've got a student ID of 643, that someplace over here there is a student 643, so that we can link those two things up, right? Okay, so now what do? We can link up a student with a schedule, but that doesn't solve our problem with linking up a schedule with particular courses.
So either you can have a list of courses associated with each of these schedules. That can be one column. I know some databases allow you to do that, where you can have chain different rows together in one column or as part of one row. Or you break off into another table where the ID of that schedule would be associated with IDs of multiple courses.
Say that one more time again.
ID of the unique schedule would be associated with IDs of different courses that schedule is associated with.
Right.
And then you do a join of the tables to get your schedule for that student.
Right. And that is almost certainly what we would do in Rails. This spiraled into levels of complexity I wasn't anticipating.
Yeah.
But what we will have in Rails is another join table called courses schedules that will have a list of course ID and a list of schedule.
And Rails supports this?
Yes,
Oh, awesome.
through its associations. Right? So let's put in some English to this. A student has one schedule, right? That's common. Students don't have multiple schedules. Now, they might have a separate schedule every semester. We're not getting that fancy yet, because then we're getting into history, and Isabel will start getting really mad because there's more tables showing up on the thing, right? Everybody will get mad. I'll get mad, right? So a student has one schedule, We can also say that a schedule belongs to a student, right? We can pull any record out of here and say, oh, this is Tarun's schedule, this is Dean's schedule, this is Isabel's schedule, this is Carl's schedule, right? Now, a schedule has and belongs to, this is where it gets weird, has and belongs to courses. Has and belongs to many courses. I'm running out of space again.
Would the course belong to a schedule? Why does the schedule belong to a course?
Well, let's try it that way. We can say a schedule has many courses, right? But then what's the relationship of courses to a schedule? We can't say a course belongs to a schedule, not the way that a schedule belongs to a student. These are both one-to-one relationships. Right? Does everybody see that? One student has one schedule belongs to one student. Where we started running into trouble when we were separating this out is that a given schedule has many different classes, right? Which means that it has 0 or more classes in Rails speak, right? It's possible that we could have an empty schedule for a student who didn't bother to register. We can still output that schedule if we want to. Or that schedule has at least one course and up to n+1 courses. However many courses we can imagine, we can still do one more there, right? So a schedule has many courses, right? But then what's the relationship? Because we're generally worried about how these go back and forth. What is a course's relationship to a schedule? Yes, belongs to many, right?
Yeah, when you put them together, I was fine. Okay, gotcha.
Right? So this is what's known as a many-to-many relationship. We can have many possible schedules and many different courses on them. Many different courses can appear on many different schedules. So this is what's known as and belongs to, it's a habitum. That's not what you would actually say. This is just, you'll see this written out. Has and belongs to many relationship that we get in Rails models and Rails model associations, right? Which is interesting because we said we can get a list of courses, right? We just ask for, let's write some faux Rails code. If I'm creating a course controller where I just want to dump out all the courses, I can do @courses is course all, right? Boom, that will give me all of the courses this particular semester. But if I've got this relationship now where I say courses have and belong to many schedules and schedules have and belong to many courses, I can output rosters now. What's a roster? Yeah, I get a roster. Oh man, this guy's going to be in class again, man. Right? We're going to get rosters out of this, and we're going to get it without necessarily having to create a model. Now, we might very well, as our system expands out of control, but we're going to stay close to home and focus on outputting these student schedules, right? So we've got has and belongs to many. When we have this has and belongs to many relationship, we get, here, let me draw a wacky arrow that nobody's going to possibly be able to follow. We get what we call a join table. Okay? And a join table is expressly for that purpose. Join tables usually don't even have their own unique ID because any one of those records really has no meaning. Because all the table itself is a list of, here's a course ID, right? So if ITMD 413 is ID, 782, and we've got a schedule over here of ID 27, then we're going to say the course, doing it backwards, 782, that course ID appears on schedule 27 over here. Right? That's the sole purpose of that table, is just to maintain these relationships. So we can then find out, right? We can say @course is equal to course dot find, and then we can pass it in an integer. So we want to find the information for course 782, like that. Pardon the arrow that's streaking across this. My delicate little job. Now you can read it much better because it's all smudged, right? So we could say at course is course find record 782, but now we can find out at course schedules.
Is the reason we can call find on the class itself is because that represents the database?
No. That,
I would think, wouldn't it be at courses.find? Because that contains a list of all the courses?
these are just instance variables that we get in our controllers, usually. To construct the objects that those instances represent, we have to call on some class method, right? So if we're creating a brand new course, someplace we will have at course equals course.new,
Yes.
right? Here we're doing course, we're creating it by running this find method and giving it a particular record that we want to find.
Because the course class, in this case, U to ORM, represents the database, right? Or no?
Yes and no.
Or it's a way to access the data
Right.
from the database, right?
Yeah. Again, with object relational mapping, we let that database implementation float away, right? We trust that there's going to be a database over here for this to talk to, but if it ends up being something else, right, there's some kind of open API, right? Our university that we're creating this great system for, they outsource all their course bulletin information to a third-party host, then there might be just an open API that we need to hit. Our model should still be true and it should still work, even if our implementation is a little bit different. Okay. Projector is blazing away here, telling me to save energy. Okay. So one of the things that I've put on the readings for this week is to help you get into Rails guides more. Okay. So one of them is the query interface. Okay. And this tells us how to find records using different methods and conditions. And someplace here, okay, so here are all the methods that we can run. Right, you're talking about a more complete list. This is a very mature part of the Rails guides that has a really solid list here. So there's that find method, right? And we can use other kinds of things. We can use groups and joins. Some of these are more common than others. But yeah, here we go. This is what I was just demonstrating. So here's our find method, right? So here they've got a model called client. They want to find the client with the primary key or ID of 10, and so they just drop in client equals client find 10, just like that. Okay? Jumping a little bit ahead of myself, but this is the part that we're talking about with associations. Okay? Now, maybe at this point we should stop. Hammer time. No, we should stop and actually get into how do we write some of these migrations, right? How do we make some changes to things? So what is the most, actually a lot of this stuff is pretty solid, right? We've got students and names. And why don't we go ahead and do first name and last name? We've got a huge sprawling university. It's growing all the time, so eventually we're going to need to impersonally refer to people as student, Jane Q. All right, so here's what I'm doing. So you asked for, let's start. So I'm going to I'm in my demos repo. So I'm going to check out a new branch that goes back to this place where I put Hamel Rails in. We're not going to look at views much at all this week. We're going to be purely on the console, but in terms of just understanding where I'm at, right? So I'm not going to worry about all of this post and everything I did before.
Could you push everything to this demo?
I will. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to create a new branch called OMG models. Oh my God, models. Okay, and I'll push that right now so that you can find it. Let me, just for the sake of it, I will put that All right, should only have 3 commits on it at this point. Okay, so everybody understands the GitHub interface, right? We can pull down this branch tab, and then we've got these different things. So here's my OMG models branch. And I will just, for the sake of it, pop this thing in. It's still called Fancy Blog. If that bothers anybody, we can rename it. But yeah, okay, I agree. So let's change it. So we'll do get MV Fancy Blog to scheduler. Okay. Renamed app to scheduler. Okay. That is fine. All right, so I've pushed that, and what was the thing I was trying to do before I derailed myself? So let me just jump into the campfire. Okay, and while I'm at it, let's pull up some reference material. So here's my Rails guides. So I'm going to pull up the active record migrations. I'll pop this into Basecamp too. Okay, so we'll do one with some of the command line arguments, and then we'll do another model that we'll just kind of write from scratch ourselves. Okay, so I'm going to do. Let's do Rails G and let's do help. Yeah, let me get into the right directory here and scheduler. Okay, so I'm asking for specific information about what I can do with Rails G or Rails generate, right? So here are the different generators we can do. Last week we saw scaffold was one of our options, right? We can also do this scaffold controller, which will give us our CRUD methods. It will also give us our views. Right? We can do a standalone controller. We can do a task. What we're most interested in here is we want to generate a model, right? So I'm going to say Rails G model, and that model is going to be called student, and it's going to get first name, which is a string, and last name, which is a string, right? We agreed that's all we really need to have for our student model. Is that fair?
So that this basically abstracts away all the data types in the database, right? Varchar, we don't need to worry about.
Right. Now, string will generally, depending on your database implementation, string is usually the same thing as varchar 255. Okay. One of the, and I feel like this is in the reading this week, or maybe this was some personal enrichment reading I was doing that I held back my finger rather than assigning it. But one of the things that Rails likes to do that is controversial, especially those of you who have graduated from a database class, is Rails likes to keep all of the information about what the data is supposed to be like. It wants to keep that in the model. So rather than saying, oh, we've got a zip code, so we're going to do varchar 5 or an integer that's only 5 digits long, rather than doing that in the database, we'll do that in the model. And we'll say its length needs to be 5 if we're doing old school zip codes. The idea there is that your data store for your application is just another hot swappable component. So if we offload a bunch of information that says things like a zip code should only be 5 numbers long or something like that, although technically you would do that as varchar, you would not do an integer for a zip code. Does everybody agree with that statement? Why would you not store a zip code or a phone number as an integer in your database? Okay, so we might have dashes in there, although we would probably do some normalization in that. But why not store a zip code as an integer.
Why not?
Yeah.
Or you said, why not store it as a string?
I say you should store it as a string.
I see.
We might store it as an integer, or we might declare in Rails that it'll be an integer. Although even there, I don't know if I would do that.
You might want to parse it for all the area codes.
Possibly. I mean, you want to generally choose your data types, not necessarily on what you're expecting, but on what you're expecting to do with it, right? We're never going to need to know the square root of somebody's zip code, right? Versus something like price, where yes, we want to calculate 10% off, or we have some ugly little thing where we find out, oh, this person lives in Lincoln Park, let's jack the price up by 5% or something like that, right?
So this generate command basically creates a template for you for model controllers or anything that you need.
Well, depending on which generator you're calling. Here, we're just calling model, right? So if I say Rails G model student, what do I get?
Migration. Ooh.
Okay, so we get a migration, just like we did on scaffold. We get our shell student model here, and then we get a couple of tests here. We get our student test for our models, and then we get this students.yaml fixtures file. That is it. And this is the way that most professional Rails development goes. Rails generates scaffold like we did for the 10-cent tour last week, or like you do for these early tasks in the book. That's more of a touristy kind of thing, right? That's the Disney World of Rails. It's fun. Everybody's like, ooh, we made something, all right? The way that most Rails development is going to go is that we're going to focus on our models and our data first. We're not going to worry about controllers. We're not going to worry about views. We just want to get the data right, and we want to get our own little internal API right first, okay? So, in keeping with tradition, I'm going to copy exactly what I ran. Right before I start poking at this, I want to just do git add dot. We're going to get status here. Okay, so here are my new files. And I'll do git commit. Why can't it find Adam? All I did was close the program. What sad little place is it trying to store this information in? It's kind of good. It's kind of good. I'm falling head over heels in love with Adam. Yeah. Yeah. But it keeps screwing up, and it's a pretty basic, low-level thing. Okay, so one more time with feeling, git commit. All right. Create student model. And then again, I'm going to drop in. Part of what I'm going to do is I need to go back and reinstall Adam in a non-privileged location so it can stop harassing me for my administrative credentials. Okay. So we've created this basic student model here. I've created my little commit. Here's my new files. Wonderful. Okay. Now, Tarun, I always like to do that. Run a command. Don't touch anything. Don't get curious. Don't poke stuff. Commit it. Because at this point, we can always get back to our nice, fresh migration. This is especially important when we start sticking our dirty little fingers inside of the migration. If we make a syntax error or we do something stupid, we can always roll back to the point where we created this pristine migration and fix it, okay? At least until we push stuff publicly. So let's open up Atom here in this location with our schedule app. Okay, so I go into my DB migrate. Did everybody make it through that big, ugly where things are chapter? Yeah. Is that last reading thing that kind of explains the lay of the land? Yeah. Okay. More or less the same for Rails 5.1. Okay. So let's look more closely at these migration files because I just kind of breezed. I don't even, did we open the migration file last week? Okay. So at least we did that much. So what's fun about this is that we get a little short-lived class for each of our migrations. And by default, the migration is going to be called create students. okay, or create whatever the name of the model is that you've passed on the command line, right? That's going to inherit from version 5.1 of the migration module of active record. And then we've got a single method that we're defining within this class, which is change, okay? Now, migrations, with certain exceptions, Rails migrations are expected to be reversible, okay? Which means that if we screw up, right, if I accidentally had, last TT name here, right, if I misspelled something like that, that I would be able to revert this migration back to how it was. So the shorthand version of that is change. So if I do define change, right, then whatever happens inside of change, that's an implied version of this more long-winded one called def up and define down. Okay? And you'll see in the book there's a couple of places where they make use of this more verbose syntax where it's not clear how you would undo this migration. If we're doing a create table as our migration, the obvious opposite of that is drop table. But we don't actually have to go in and write manually to drop this table. Okay?
So would rollback do that? Rollback do
Yes.
Okay.
Your break-DB migrate where you roll back or you specify a particular version that will handle that kind of thing. Now, there are certain, and we can read about them in the documentation. I don't carry them on board. All I can tell you as a statement of fact is that there are certain things that you can do in migrations that are not reversible. But the documentation will warn you about those kinds of things. Okay? So within this change method that lives for the length of this class when we're running this migration, we're running a create table method, right? And it takes an argument, which is that we're going to create this table called students, which, remember, is the pluralized form. Let's go back. Where's my... Right? I said Rails G model student, and our inflector automatically pluralizes that. Remember that in the Ruby Rails scheme of things, we have a class. It gets mapped to a database table, right? The class is singular, so we have student or user or pet. The database itself will be plural, so we'll have a students table or a pets table or a, oh, I got that in the wrong one, forgot about user. Users table or a pets table, right? This inflector just does that stuff for us.
It's pretty cool. I played around with it a little bit. It failed on a couple of
Yep.
like unique words where you can open up the module and define it yourself.
Right.
Which is cool.
Yeah, and there's another place in Rails where you can, if you've got certain inflections, like if Isabel decides to become a freelancer who designs appointment scheduling software for dentists, we can add in our irregular plurals like teeth if they're missing, right? So you can do Rails G model tooth. It will give you a teeth database, okay? All right, so that's how our models get mapped out. And again, we want to follow Rails/Ruby snake case naming when we've got multiple words like that. So we've got our first name and we've got our last name. Now, Kelly, you don't have this benefit, but the other three of you sitting in this room have taken classes with me where we've done interface design. Maybe Tarun, you didn't.
I took your standard space, but
Yeah. I just want to point out one silly thing. So I'm always screaming about web forms, right? That do this. What's your first name? And what's your last name? Right? You'll see this everywhere. Whereas all we will really need to do as developers is give people a box for their damn name, right? And we can separate that thing out so that we just have one big box. What's your name? right? And that will work most of the time. People tend to know how to write their name. Nobody's going to voluntarily say, my name is Stali, Carl, right? They're smarter than that. So hopefully, if I remember, we're going to come back around to this thing here in a bit. Okay? So I've done that. I've got my migration. And the migration looks pretty darn good. All right. We've got this local t variable, right, which is our table. And now notice, does this syntax look weird to anybody? Where we do t.string and then first name and then another t.string and then last name and a t.timestamps? Why not t.first name and then pass string as a symbol to it? I think it's important to question our syntax that we have to write.
Sure. I mean, the T in my assumption, I'm just reading code. T is the table we're referring to. That's going to be created. So T has the table itself can take on different data types, right? And then we're giving it column names, which is first name. Just because of the case of Rails or Ruby, we have to give it a symbol. So what would make sense is to give it a strings, but
right.
So.
And of course, symbols tend to work a lot like strings in Rails. Does everybody see what Tuna's saying? We expect tables to understand what a string is, or what an integer is, or what a blob is, right? We don't expect tables to understand what a first name is, or a grade point average is, or all these other things. So the API makes a little bit better sense. I thought this was weird the first 100,000 times I looked at it in Rails, thinking about like, well, why would you do that? Everything else in Rails is kind of putting me at the center of my own world, and here I feel like I'm putting in an argument, but this makes sense that a table would know how to do a string thing, and then it would rely on us to pass an argument to it, which is to say, ooh, that string thing is going to be called first name. This one is going to be called last name. And then we do timestamps just like that.
So is the ID already there, or do we have to do t.id?
You get IDs for free.
For free, okay.
Right? Now, let's look at, just on that question, let's look at our migrations. Is it not migrations? There is a thing that talks about okay, so hold on a second. This is not good responsive design here. Okay, so a primary key column called ID will also be added implicitly as it's the default primary key for all active record models, right? So this is actually walking through the exact same thing as I'm walking through in this migration overview, right? The timestamps macro adds 2 columns created at and updated at. These special columns are automatically managed by active record if they exist. All right, and that talks a little bit about the change. There is a way that we can more specifically say what our ID column should be, but ID is so universal that you're just inviting trouble if you start mucking around with it. Now, it's a little bit different if you inherit some legacy database and you're trying to shoehorn Rails, or rather shoehorn the database into Rails. That can get a little bit more challenging. Okay? All right, so one more thing, because I just am not happy unless I'm going to do that as a separate migration. All right. So I'm going to just do my out-of-the-box migration here. Okay, not changing anything. We'll run get status just to prove that. And now I can do my rake db migrate on schedule. Actually, I'm going to do rake db drop here because there may be some databases laying around. Okay, good. So now I'm going to do rake db migrate. Okay, so it's created my table called students. These have been migrated, and of course, now I've got my little red star because I've got my schema.rb file. And if I run Atom here to see this thing, right, again, here we're calling on the active record module and its schema class to define which version we're using. And of course, this latest version should match all of the up to the most recent migration that we have run, unless we're rolling things back. And then we'll see something that is similar, and that will make Tyrone happy because we've got strings here now instead of symbols, right? But we can see now by looking at this that we're going to have these 4 columns, first name, last name, created at, updated at. Now, just out of sheer morbid curiosity, let's go ahead and fire up Rails C or Rails console. Okay. So I'm going to create at student is equal to student new, right? And I'll see this output from Rails console that tells me that there is a nil ID for my student ID here. Okay. So if I go ahead and create a record here, if I do something like at student first name is equal to Jane, I can do at student, right, we're doing this the long way. Last name is equal to student. Okay, and now I can do at student dot save. Okay, and here I will see that we're inserting our little prepared statement, a first name, last name, created and updated at into our database. So there's Jane. Her last name is student, confusingly enough. Sorry, that was about, I was just going with my example before I had Jane Q student, right? All right, so now if I do at student is equal to student first, we'll just do student.first. So this will grab the first, and in this case, only record out of our database. There's Jane. She's got a student ID of 1.
It also mutated our at students.
Did it update that reference?
Student.
Oh, at student. Well, I've gone ahead and mutated it myself and
okay.
done this thing. But yeah, that should get updated once you create the record. But I can ask, what is the student ID? And it's 1. Okay. So along with first name and last name and these other properties, right, we get this particular option.
Nice. Okay, so we can do our validation right from the console. Don't need to have the whole everything wired up.
Exactly. In fact, you don't want to bring that world of hurt on yourself. You want to know that you can reliably ask for these things before you start popping them into controller, especially if you're writing your controller methods yourself, right? For a lot of the CRUD operations, there is no shame in bringing a scaffolded controller into play. But as we'll see, for example, like if we're actually building this thing out, here we're looking further down the road in views and things like that. Students should not be able to delete courses, for example, right? So we don't want that whole scaffolded thing. Students should not be able to delete themselves, right? There's all kinds of things that we would do, so we'd worry about that kind of thing.
Why are there 2 steps? Why is there a migration step and then the schema is generated as well? Why isn't the migration just used as the source of truth? Because both of them look almost exactly the same and have the same information too.
Well, because eventually you develop a stack of migrations, and each migration represents some unique aspect of the table, right? Now, one other thing I want to do is to call upon, and let's go and find our documentation. Where is our active record query language? Okay, so we can use the find method, like I just did, to go and find a particular object, right? So I know that there's a student of ID 1. I can do at student is equal to student find 1. Right? And of course, it's going to be interesting to pass in a non-existent record. If I do student find 10, right? So we get an active record not found error when I go to hit that 10. But if I go back, student find 1, boom, no problem. We get Jane out of this database. Now, the question I like to ask myself, and this is probably getting too far ahead, but I want to cover it because it's only a 6-week course. How would we likely pull students out of a database? What would we query on?
The unique number, because honestly, when that's what we do in IT, they always want to know what's your A number. I don't care your name.
Sure. And the question is have we set this up in such a way that we can use these as unique ID numbers? I don't know. So let's say we don't. All we've got is first name, last name, and this ID, which is wholly dependent on the database itself. How would we probably query for students out of this database?
First name, last name.
Yeah, or probably maybe even just last name, right? Like that would be how we would do that. So one of the things that we can do.
So here by default, find assumes that we're putting in primary ID.
Right.
So you just pass in a hash then, saying first name equals something to find, or?
Okay, so find. So if we look at the documentation, find is always expecting primary key arguments. So we can't do. Let's see what happens if we try to do @student is equal to student find. If I put in Jane, okay. So it says could not find student with ID Jane. So it's prepared. The find method is always working with unique identifiers, right? So we need some other kind of method if we're going to pull a student out of here. All right. Look at this take method first. I showed you that, which is arbitrary. Last, semi-arbitrary. Find by, okay. The find by method finds the first record matching some condition. So here we do client find by, and then we put in first name. So we can try this. Let's do @student is equal to student find by, and we can do first name Jane, right? Boom, found her. Okay, using this student find by first name syntax like that. All right? And if you were a SQL veteran, it can be sometimes interesting to look at what this particular query does, right? So we're just saying select students from students, where students.firstname is equal to whatever we're querying for, and then we're getting a limit of question mark, right? So we can more explicitly set limits. But if we look at the documentation for find by, it says the method returns the first record matching some conditions. So if we have 3 students whose first name is Jane, this is only going to return the first record that it stumbles upon, okay? Which, depending on how our database is responding, might be the very first Jane we entered, or it might be the most recent Jane that we entered. Just like that, okay? So if we go down a little bit further here, okay, we get a bang method. Okay, now we get these find in batches. So here we can do find each. All right, so this will try to find each user according to a particular. I feel like we skipped some things here, though.
There's a .where method. Where
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. I thought that's what we hit.
all the records that match.
I don't know what got skipped there. Single object. Take. Did I just skip it?
It was right underneath the find, right there, .where. Right there. Yep, right.
This is equivalent to writing that.
If you take the take out.
A take, yeah. What I was looking for is a section like this find by section that was specifically about the where clause. I'm sure it's in here someplace. Where is way too important.
Put it in basically check this link out. And you can say that it is something you can
Right.
to look at or not.
And this is good. The one thing to note is that API doc does do versioned documentation. So here we're looking at the version 4.2.7. So what we probably want to do is plug in 5.1.1. Or sorry, 5.1.0. Still not found. They don't have up to 5 dot.
5.0.0.
Well, what jerks? Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, it looks like their documentation only goes up to 4.27.
But it gives you an idea.
It gives you an idea, yeah. And we could, of course, jump over with this information in hand, right? We're in the active record class and its query methods. We could take this over to dev docs with no problem. All right, so yeah, where allows us to put in a whole bunch of different conditions to find a particular record. Right, so we can do add student is equal to student where, and then we can do last name student. Okay. Now note that when we did the find by first name method, it implicitly set a limit of 1 record. And when we did the where, it implicitly set a limit of 11 records. If you dig further and further down Rails, beyond where we're going to get this semester, you're going to run into more things with database performance and some of Rails queries that get to be kind of ugly to work with after a while. Okay, my throat is getting a bad tickle. I feel I'm going to have a coughing fit coming on, so I'm going to go take a cough drop. Let's take another 5-ish break, and then we'll come back. We'll get to start digging through some of these associations, and we'll start getting more complex with how our migrations work together. Sound good?
So the model class will always be empty. This is the approach you
That's
take,
right.
the model class will empty.
Model is always empty.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So if you wanted to look at what your model is made of, you have to look at the migration.
You have to look at your schema.rb. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And that's the other reason for schema.rb is that it is the product of all of the migrations that you've run.
Okay.
Up to whatever version is specified. No, apparently I'm very quiet between Wednesday and Tuesday. And my voice just gets shot.
Perfect. Awesome.
Did you figure out your issue?
No, I'm totally crazy.
Yeah, because the demo didn't have any products. The demo was more like say
I
hello.
know. I screwed up my GitHub.
Different one.
Sorry.
Very, very cool. Very, very cool. What? Yeah, I can hear him. Was he teaching 440?
Oh no.
This early in the morning?
He's teaching something.
Okay.
It's driving me crazy. I'm like,
Well, hey.
I'm just so used to when he was voice to kind of like filtering through my mind, see if he's mentioned to me that I need to go over there and pay attention or something. But dude, that's not gonna happen while he's teaching over there.
Okay.
And I'm being pulled in 2 ways. This is definitely going to be interesting. That where though, that's going to help me a lot. Do you actually mind if you quick check a logic thing for me?
Sure. What's up?
So, honestly, I haven't coded this movie yet.
Alright, do that. But alright. Yeah, that's a good
I
project.
figured out.
Okay.
I think I figured out the logic for how to figure out the different ops.
Okay. Okay, let's do this so we can collaborate. Yeah, go for it.
So basically, this project you have people moving from one person goes from A to B,
Yeah.
one person goes from B to C, one person goes C to D. But you actually have this massive database of everyone's movements, and that database figures out how to get things from A to D.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
So I think this is the logic of how to do this.
Okay.
I just want someone else to verify that this will work.
Sure.
So for 2-leg jump, you find all the destinations because you have the origin and destination for every person.
Mm-hmm.
So you find all destinations of A, you find all the origins of C, then you find one that matches, and that 2-leg jump should be done.
A is the source or the origin, right?
C is the event destination.
Okay, got it.
Then but then you have like the destinations of A, which would be B, then you have the destination origins of C, which would be B in the two-leg jump.
Okay.
That's a fairly simple one.
So how are you figuring out the connectivity?
That's what this little function here will do when it figure out how to code it in Ruby syntax. You find all so you find the destinations of A. So you find all ones where, okay, if the origin is A, what the person put in, give me all the destinations of every record that has A. So if you have like five chips like start from A, you're gonna have 5 destinations of A.
Okay.
And it says, okay, if C is an eventual end goal, give me all the origins of that. And you see if you have like 4 of those, 4 things that go to C. Okay, do any of these 5 from A and any of these 4 from C match? Find one that matches, there's your path.
So you're just trying to find one path. You're not trying to figure out what the best path is, or
One path for now, MVP, minimum viable product here.
well, you're doing more. In my opinion, you're doing a little more than the minimum wild product. But yeah, if you can accomplish that, that's great. Because if I were doing this, my first step would be is to have a simple form that allows the user to define a route for themselves that they're going to take, which would be one line in the input file.
What do you mean by user defines a route for themselves?
The user defined the file, right? Each line in the Excel file you said is user defined.
Yeah, everyone put in their info. So.
Exactly. So I would have that as a form where they submit one route, and per user I start creating this input file, and that would be my MVP.
Yeah.
This is completely logic driven and completely function oriented and completely back end oriented.
Yes.
So
the front end we already have, because the front end is just really Google form. We already have a Google form that puts out to the spreadsheet.
That's Carlos okay with it, then it looks good to me. It looks like a fairly challenging thing to work on.
Yeah,
and
the thing that I wanted, because this one's easy. It's the 3 and the 4 step leg jumps where it gets convoluted, shall we say. So like for the 3 you get final destinations of A, final origins of B, then you find something with a destination of A and an origin of D, and that's your path. Kind of came 2 little methods. The full is we can type convoluted, but I think that one should be good. Yeah.
Eventually you have to make a graph of all the different routes that are being taken from one origin.
Right now I'm just trying to find, yes, that's what you basically do. How to do it, still figuring that out. I'm thinking, can you maybe do this like some sort of array or something, but...
We definitely need something a little more complex than an array.
Then maybe I put all destinations into an array, and check, is there anything in an array there, match array of this, find match, there you go. It's going to be interesting. What's kind of cool is I know this, if I can advance this program past this class, it will actually be even translated to other languages. It's a cool thing.
Sure.
Because there are literally people worldwide who would want to use this. It's kind of crazy in my mind, but yeah. English is a worldwide game. Keep people coordinating with Russia and everything.
Not an easy problem to solve, but yeah, should be interesting. So is that what you're doing then, the scheduling?
I think I might do like a reservation, like scheduling.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Yeah, just have a form
Yeah.
for an appointment, like just minimum, like we did right here. He's gonna basically he's walking us through our first application.
Yeah.
So once he shows us how do you link all of this, how do you do all of that, that's it. You'll have one form that will let you create an appointment. Just look at it from like a admin or a nurse standpoint.
Yeah.
Right? And they fill out a form, and then you just link that to a user, and that's it.
Yeah.
If you can accomplish more than that, oh, I'm so sorry.
I
That's
know, I
it's a
have
touch
a week
screen.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to catch up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel a little better. Not there yet though.
I mean, tomorrow, if you guys want to stay after class, we can all start working on our own things and kind of bounce ideas and questions off each other.
I'm not me.
I'd
Yeah,
love to do that.
let's
I'll
do
see
that.
if I can try and get out of work because I took off yesterday and I'm taking off today too.
You have to take off for the rest 3 weeks, honestly.
I know that's.
I don't know how you're gonna do work, and honestly, I am sleeping and doing this class, and that's it.
So I'm still in the ITM office, so it's really good because all I do is just answer the phone. Everyone else, like all the advisors, they do their own work, so they don't give me any like projects, like especially because it's summer, it's so slow right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just there doing my homework and doing my reading, so it's like perfect. But yeah, but they're so like chill too. Like if I need to take off even from class, like they know I'm taking class.
Yeah.
Like you need like study time or whatever, you don't have to leave.
So you're going to
The conference room,
thank
I
you.
always go in there.
I like about collectively getting homework done after class tomorrow.
Yeah. It's open this summer.
What's happening? Yeah, we'll do that. We're gonna go to the ITM office and hack it out.
Homework hangout.
Yeah.
Good deal.
I mean, the gym doesn't open until 1600, so.
Till 1600.
I tried leaving my phone on that time, but I couldn't.
My time management skills actually went up when I switched, so.
24 hours?
Yes.
Why? How does that make a difference? What? Either you're good at it.
Instead of getting 12 hours, you get 24, so you get more time.
It's all a mind game.
Okay, so
Yes, so where is very nice, and it gives you the capabilities to basically create any type of SQL query that you need that lets you chain with or
Right.
and. Pretty cool.
so it's highly flexible.
But the only thing I was concerned about is because looking at 4 documentation, I wasn't sure if this might be deprecated or, you know, if 5 has something new. That's what my only, I guess, concern is
Right.
What I guess my biggest concern is when I look up something, I don't get the Rails guide as the first hit.
Right.
Or
You have to
documentation.
dig for
That's
it.
unfortunate.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can even trust this because usually.
Yeah, eventually you'll know to just go to Rails guides and dig through that. And I can never remember I remember the first part of their subdomain, but not the last part for doing
I mean, you can always check the
domain limited queries through Google.
You can always check against dev docs. They'll tell you something's deprecated.
Okay.
Yeah, but in Google, I want to search for, like, I want to accomplish X, and then sometimes, like, you know, it should pop up that, oh, here's this method that accomplishes X.
Okay.
But here, I don't get the Rails guide. That's what I don't like.
All right, so I'm going to do what I forgot to do before, which is to add the migration or run migration for student model. So I've got my, what didn't it like? Oh. There we go. Okay. So now I want to do a couple of things. I was thinking about it, and I'm going to violate our sense of simplicity for the sake of education.
This is our classic use case for our project, so it would be great if we could accomplish this.
We can.
Okay.
The thing I wanted to point out was perhaps we should add a non-foreign key reference to this schedule, so we would just have a term. So we'd have fall 2017 or spring 2018 or something. Okay, are you okay with that? Okay, because otherwise we're going to have 2 tables here, both of them nothing but keys, which I think will be a little harder for people to get their heads wrapped around. So, and then plus this allows me to do a simple migration where we're just going to have the term, and then we'll do a second migration where we do the foreign key reference.
Yeah, that's what link I'm missing.
That's the missing link. Okay.
Between 2 models.
Okay, so we're going to add a term column to our schedule. And actually the first migrate we're going to do, okay, so I'm going to do Rails G model schedule. All right, and I'm going to just do 1 column term, which is a string, right?
Oh, the foreign key later. Okay.
Yeah, we'll do that as a separate migration to show how to do so that you don't get under the impression that you have to be perfect on the command line and do exactly what it is that you need. We can always write more migrations later. So we'll run this schedule migration. Okay. So we get all the things that we expect. Once again, I'm going to grab exactly what I wrote on the command line. Do git add dot, git commit. Add schedule model. Okay. Close that. All right. And if I want to, let's just look at the migration. It's going to be the same basic thing as we had before. Okay, except now we're just down to one thing, t-string term. Okay, so we're just going to run this migration because we're young and foolish and we don't realize that there's anything that we have to do to actually knit these two things together until after we've run the migration. All right, so we'll go ahead and do that. We'll do rake db migrate. All right, so now we've created schedules. And what we've got at this point is we have two, in our database, we have a students table and a schedules table. And in our app, we have a student model and a schedule model. And nobody knows about anybody else. Okay? So we've basically got two apps going on here, one that just lists terms and one that just lists students. So what we need to do is to link these things together. And we're going to link them together with this language that we were using before, that a student has one schedule. Okay, now we've complicated that with this term thing. We'll probably just pretend that the whole schedule table gets flushed. I don't know. And that any given schedule belongs to a single student. So that's how we're going to operate here. Okay? So I want to create a new migration. If I, again, do Rails G and then help. Thank you. Don't know why I keep doing that today.
Yes,
okay.
Once we ran the migration, the schema table got updated. That's correct behavior, right?
Yes. Did I actually run it? I did, but I did not actually. Okay. So yeah, so here's our schema. Our version has been updated, and now we have this schedules table that's been created here. All right, so let's go ahead and do my shorthand here. Run migration for schedule model.
Now I'm seeing the point of migration, because we do this incrementally and we can roll back every change as we run migration.
Right, right. Okay. So, and just so everything is up to date up on GitHub, let me push this. Okay. Now, let's look at a page from Rails Guides that is going to be burned into your retinas by the end of this class because you'll be looking at it so dang often. That is the page on associations. Ooh, and let's look at the one for migrations too. Okay, so let's look at associations first so we can figure out what we're going to do in order to get these tables to talk to each other, because we need to kind of do almost double duty here. We need to get one layer that we're going to accomplish through a migration, which will get the databases talking to each other, or not really get them talking to each other, but will give a way for us to have this student ID that in turn references this student's table. Okay? And then we need the models to talk to each other to say, hey, I'm a student, I have a schedule. And the schedule to say, hey, I'm a schedule, I belong to some student someplace. Okay? So they use this sort of repeated author book, right? So here we have a class of author who has many books. And then we have this dependent destroy thing, meaning if we delete an author from this particular thing, all the author's books should go with him or her. All right? This is what's called a domain-specific language. Has many books. belongs to author. So guess what we're going to be writing in our models? You've already seen a pretty big preview here. All right? So we've got this association. And if we go and look to our types of associations, we have 6 of them. We have a belongs to, a has one, a has many, a has through, a has one again, and then has and belongs to many, right? And we could even, if we wanted to, we could change it so that students have many schedules, right? And we just want to reference one from the particular semester. We'll start by doing has one, and then when that blows up, we can move over to has many if that doesn't work. Okay?
And these associations basically do the foreign key relationship.
That's what we're going to handle. So here's a basic has one and belongs to, or has many and belongs to. So we said an author has many books. And the thing to note about this author table is that it is exactly like our student table. It has an ID and it has a name. We've got separate first and last name fields, but the same idea is true. So looking at the authors table, we don't get any sense that there's any relationship at all to books. Okay? That tends to be the power of possession, right? I can say I have one dog, but there's nothing that you can tell looking at me that Hank, my dog, belongs to me. However, if we bring in Hank, Hank belongs to me, and he's got a little tag around his neck that says, well, he doesn't, I don't think necessarily say it belongs to me, but it's got my address and phone number on it, so therefore, by extension, right? So if we look at the other side of this, the books, where we say books belong to an author, here is the author ID foreign key here that's going to allow us to say, hey, author, which books are you an author on? And hey, book, who's your author? Okay. So we'll see this little bit of code here that shows that this belongs to operation. All right, so it says the corresponding migration for this books and authors thing might look like this. All right. So we see this is everything at once, right? This is somebody writing a create books migration, and they're going to create 2 tables in the same migration. That's perfectly legit to do. So they're creating an authors, there's our name, and there's our timestamps like we'd expect. Now we have our create table of books where we're going to do T belongs to, and then we refer to the singular of whom it belongs to. And we add another thing. This is what I was trying to get at with that where thing, but we went past it. You can add indexes or indices if you're Latinate and snotty. Indices or indexes to particular columns on your table. And what that does is, in a very short and non-technical description, is it speeds up our lookup. So if we know that there's some particular column that we're going to be hitting a lot. For example, if we know that most of the time we're going to be looking up students by their last name, we would want to index last name so that you can look through all those last names of every record in your table really fast. Now, you get a little performance hit when you index on write operations, because every time you write or update, you have to update your index, but you get a huge payoff on your read operations, which is oftentimes worth it. So because we're going to be doing so much with these foreign keys, it makes perfect sense to index them. So what we need to do is write a migration that's going to add this belongs to for our schedule table, right? Because we want student ID here. That belongs to operation is what says, hey, I need a placeholder for a foreign key. Yes, Dean?
Can you index multiple columns?
You can.
Okay.
And of course, you could index all of your columns, but then you're basically back to 0. It's as if you indexed none. So you have to be judicious in terms of what is going to be the target of an index. All right, so we know this belongs to thing matters. So let's skip out of this and find our migrations guide. And let's just see if we can find an example. Okay, we've got a belongs to or references. Oh, look at this. So we can do add user reference to products in this example. Here's our change method. Now we're going to use this add reference thing. Okay, we can also use belong to. Well, we've been talking about belongs to, so let's go ahead and do that. So what is the syntax here? We're going to do belongs to, right? Products, what belongs to it? User does. And then we're going to add this foreign key, which is true. Okay? Add user ref to products. See, this is where I get crazy in my head. I'm like, which one is the... Products, okay. Add user reference to products. Okay. So yeah, we're modifying the products table. It's going to reference the user. Okay.
In this case, it's saying a product belongs to a user?
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to do Rails G. If I do help again, I'll see that one of the things that I can generate is a migration. All right? And so I'm going to do Rails G migration, add student reference to schedule. All right? Short little one file. Now, if I want to, and I will,
Dated user colon references, does that add the add references automatically, or what does that do?
let's see what it does. First, let's make the commit first. We'll do git add dot, and we'll do git commit. Oh, wait a second. Okay. Git commit. Created migration, create, right? Our imperative mood to add foreign key on schedule. Jump in here. All right, so I've got that. I'm going to close it, and now I'm going to look at my new add student reference to migration. And I get nothing. I get a change method with absolutely nothing in it. Okay? Now, there are certain pieces of syntactic sugar. If we want to add a column to a table, we can do that. But ordinarily, for most migrations, we kind of have to write them from scratch. All right, so I'm going to say belongs to students. Let's get this right. This is where another point where I screw all the time. I'm going to do the add reference syntax. So we'll do add reference. Schedules. I'm just going to reference a student. And we'll do foreign key true. Let's make sure I got that syntax correct. Okay, so we're saying find our, in this case, products table. In this other case, I'm going to say go and find our schedules table. Add a reference to singular student, and we're saying it's true that this is a foreign key.
How does it, we just say user, how does it know we're talking about the primary key or the ID?
It's one of those convention over configuration things that all we have to do is pass in the reference to the model whose primary key we want to track as our foreign key on the second model, and it does it for us. Okay, so I'm going to say get diff, all right, and I'm going to add this thing in case I screw it up, so I can always roll back through git and fix it if I made a mistake, which it's entirely possible that I have. All right, and I'm going to say git commit write migration to add foreign key to schedule model. Okay. Now, if we do rake DB help. I feel like we can do a dry run. Yes, do a dry run without executing the action. So to test things first, we can do a quick dry run, I believe. Break, DB, migrate, dry run. Okay. Is this going to give us anything interesting? It's not, but it is going to be, it's not going to throw us any errors. So let's just hold our breaths, run rake db migrate, and then we'll see what happens on our schema. Okay?
So where did you find the add reference? Because I looked up under active record migrations, and now here it tells me there's another way. You have an add underscore foreign underscore key method.
There's multiple different ways that you can do it.
Okay.
I stuck close to home for that example that we had just to avoid anything blowing up. So here I've run this reference, right? Set up this foreign key, and now I've got a git status. If I run that, I should see my schema file has changed. It has. If I do git diff, now let's see what has happened. And what has happened is my schedules table now has an integer column, student ID, which is exactly what we drew on the board. And it is also calling its index method on student ID, and it's given it its own name of index schedules on student ID, just like that. Okay. So far, so good. Now, so we can do this. So we can do run migration to add foreign key on schedules. Yeah, it's getting too long. Let me make sure I'm staying within that. Run migration to add foreign key to schedule. Okay. We've got it. Now, I need to go and open up my models. And I will see my schedule model and my student model. On student, I'm going to say has one schedule. And on my schedule, I'm going to say belongs to student. Okay, so now I've got the foreign keys set up, and now in my models, I've reinforced this relationship. Now let's see what happens when I try to fire up Rails console here. Okay? So do I have any students? There's good old Jane. She's still in our database. Now, we're used to this kind of thing, right? Where we can say at student first name. Let me get Jane. What these associations do for us in terms of the API of our app is now we can say things like at student.schedule. Yes, okay.
That's awesome.
That's totally awesome. All I said was at student.schedule. And what it went to do was to say select schedules from schedules where schedules.studentID is equal to our thing. And of course, we get a nil record because we don't have a schedule yet. But let's go ahead and create one for her for fall 2017. We can say at student.schedule.term, right, because we've got that term method, is equal to fall 2017. Uh-oh, what happened? Oh, Stolly, what's going on? Little clog in your brain.
You need to schedule that new, right? Because there is no, it's nil object. You can't call term on nil.
We can. We need to pass in a hash to schedule. Schedule. I think this should work. Doesn't like that either. What is going on? Why am I flaking on this?
Should it be equal?
It should. Can we set that to a hash? Term. Why isn't this working? We've got a has one method.
Well, you also need to put student.id, right?
No, that's the beauty of this, is that when we say student schedule, we call upon this thing. Okay, now that's interesting. We got student schedule. Maybe that's what the problem is. At student is equal to student first. At student schedule, if we do term right here, will it let us put in 2017? It did not like that.
Schedule nil, so can't you call anything on nil?
Well, but you can, just like you can call at student.firstname even when that's nil.
To me,
We
what would make sense is student.schedule equals schedule.new, and then you pass in the hash which says term 2017.
Yeah, but we get this ability to read and write from our associated properties. Let's go back to the thing and let's see what little crazy thing is going to click in my head so that I shake it off here.
But that was pretty awesome convention.
Yeah, now if it would just work, right?
Yeah.
It's that Three Stooges bit. Great, my masterpiece. Now all I got to do is sell it. Well, let's try it the opposite direction. We can always do at student is equal to student.first. Right, so we've got this student record, and now we should be able to do what Tarun is saying we can do at schedule is equal to schedule new, right? Like that, and now we should be able to do at schedule term is equal to fall 2017, right? And now we should be, okay, no problem. There we go. Thank you for that catch. And now if we do at schedule dot student, should be able to set that equal to at student. All right. Ooh, that was very Frank Underwood, wasn't it? Okay, and let's do at schedule save. Okay, so this worked correctly. I'm not sure what's going on, what craziness I'm forgetting about, because we should be able to create a new schedule from a student, just like here we're creating a new schedule. But there may be something else that I'm forgetting about there. There is an accept nested attributes thing that may be coming into play here. But now if I say at student is equal to student first, and I do at student dot schedule, okay, we should get this. And if I do at student dot schedule dot term, that's what I should get, right? So my syntax is right in this direction. It was in the other direction what wasn't allowing me to create that new schedule. All right. Okay. But of course, this isn't the meat and potatoes of what we're trying to do. We want to do one step further where we need also our courses model.
This is still pretty good and impressive on how
Is it clear?
the relationship, yeah, like has one belongs to enforce those rules in the model, right?
Right.
Then if those rules are enforced, why does it let you create an object with schedule ID nil?
Where did we?
Why does it let you create a schedule with student ID nil? Shouldn't it enforce that you're required to have a student?
We could do that with our model validations. Yeah.
Okay.
That we should not be able to do.
So I thought that relationship would enforce that. No, that's more on the database side.
I think so. Yeah, it will allow you to create orphan records. I think. Let's find out. At bad schedule is equal to schedule new at bad schedule save. Ah, it will not. Okay. Good. So we get that for free too. So by enforcing those things, it will not allow us to have an orphan record like that that does not have a student that it belongs to.
But it'll let you create a new instance of it with nil. That's what I guess my concern was. I thought the model would enforce the same thing that the database is enforcing, saying that, hey, you can't have a schedule with nil student ID because nil student ID doesn't exist.
Right, but the validations and the checks are not run on a new instance.
Okay.
Right? All that does is say, hey, we're going to prepare this new class. We're not saving it, so that's what allows us to then say at bad schedule and then to set a particular student ID on that thing. Okay, I still don't understand what's haywire in my head that we're not able to set a new student schedule from within her, from an instance of that student. But I'm sure I will figure it out on the drive home. And then I'll be all mad, and then I'll write a 5,000-word Facebook or Basecamp post for all of you to read in your copious free time. What's that? All right. Okay, so let's create our courses, because the other thing I want to do is, because this is such a common one, is I want to get to the point of creating this has and belongs to many table. All right, so let's create our courses migration next. What do we got here? Oh, that's right.
Actually, could you go over the controller thing also? Do we just generate a controller with Rails G controller, name of controller, and just generate a controller that way?
Yes. Yes. And then it's up to you to insert which models are getting called within that controller. So we'll see that as we get into views and controllers more next week. Okay, so let's see. Add model associations to student and schedule. Okay. For the sake of time, am just going to do subject and location for our courses rather than doing start and end times right now, just so I can have complete records without writing a whole bunch of stuff. We can write another migration on Wednesday, tomorrow. They'll add that other stuff. But for right now, let's just do that. So yeah, so we'll do again. Rails G model course, and we will have a, what was it? Subject, which is a string, and a location, which is a string. Okay, so we get that. I will add this. I We'll copy again religiously and faithfully what I wrote on the command line. Course model. Okay. Okay. Now, courses is not going to have a foreign key on it. Okay. Not right now, anyway. Right? Because we've said that the relationship between schedule and courses is that a schedule has many courses and a courses has many schedules. So we'll need this intermediary join table. That's where the foreign keys will sit between these two things.
Shouldn't you have two foreign keys? Because we want to guarantee that the IDs being put there are existing student IDs and course IDs, right?
Right, and that's how we will set up this join table. We're going to write a migration that will create this join table for us, which is going to be an interesting migration because all we're doing is creating the join table. We're not creating an associated model. Okay? All right, so where are we at? So I'm going to do rake db migrates. Hold on. Let me just make sure everything's cool here. Okay. Rake db migrates. Okay, so now there's our courses. If I run git diff, there it is added to our schema. All right, so we're going to say run migration to create. I'll keep this similar. Run migration for course model. There we go. Okay, so let's see. Now on our has and belongs to many association. Okay, so here's where we're going to write a migration that creates a table that has no associated model. Okay. And I've taken this right out of the Rails guide for the has and belongs to many association. So we're going to create a table called, and this has to be in a particular order. It goes lexically first. So remember back 2 weeks ago when we started this course and found out that you could compare strings with herb, right? Let's do this. We do herb, assemblies, greater than parts. That's false. We do assemblies, less than parts. That should be true. So that means we're going to have a courses schedules, right? If I do courses are lexically less than schedules, that's true. So my table name is going to be called courses schedules, not schedules courses. Okay? So let's drop out of here and let's do rake g migration, and we will call this thing create courses schedules join table. Aborted. Thank you. It's Rails. All right, so hold up here. There we go. Okay. So here we're going to create the courses schedules join table. All right. And if I do just a quick cat on this, migrate 2017 674. Okay. This is again going to be a blank migration that I've got to run myself. So I'm going to go over to, what the heck. Let's stick with the tradition. Add and commit this blank migration file. You never regret making a commit. It can be tedious, but you never regret it. Generate migration for courses schedules table. All right, so we're going to jump into this. All right, now we want to say create table. And our table is going to be called courses schedules. ID is going to be set to false, so we will not have unique IDs on each of these rows. Again, because there's no need to associate this thing, right? All right, so we did that. False do T, and then we need to do our before we forget, let's drop that end in here. All right, so then we're going to do T belongs to course index true. T belongs to schedule index true, just like that. All right. Okay. And again, because we've scaffolded a model, when we're calling create table here, we are not creating a courses schedules model, right? Now, if we'd screwed up and done Rails G model courses schedules, it would have happily created a wacky courses schedule model. But we don't want that. We're just using this join table to get these two things to talk to each other. Okay. All right, there we go. So let's do write migration for schedule join. All right. Now we'll do rake db migrate again. Okay, now it is telling us that we're creating this courses schedules join table. All right, of course our schema RB has changed, so if I do git diff, now we've got our courses schedules just like that. Okay, so we've got two columns, course ID and schedule ID, just like I wrote up here that I said we would. And we're creating indexes on both of these because we're going to be racing back and forth between these two tables all the time. Okay. So now what do? We got to let's commit after running this migration. Keep running log to see how I'm writing these commits so that they're somewhat similar. Run migration for join table. Let's go ahead and push. All right, now we need to look at our models for schedule and for course, right? So we say belongs to student, and then we say has and belongs to many courses. And on the flip side, so I don't have to write this long thing again, we will say that a course has and belongs to many schedules. Just like that. Okay? So let's see what kind of damage we can cause. Okay, so I'm going to say let's create just a couple of courses. At course is equal to course new. All right, and we'll do course subject ITMD 413. And we could do at course location SSB. Where the heck are we? I don't know. Is that the room? I don't know. Okay. And now we can do at course save. Okay. So we've created our little course here. All right. My confidence is completely blown on this thing. So what do we do at schedules? Did it save any of that stuff? This will be better. I'm going to just write a bunch of seed data that'll have all this stuff sorted out before we come in here tomorrow to start writing tests on all this. Okay, so we do have a schedule ID. So can I say at schedule is equal to schedule first at schedule courses I pass it a course instance. Damn it. Something is goofy. We're getting our join, right? I asked for schedule courses. So it's going to, this will do the magic when I get the stupid writers right? This is exactly what I should want. Like, here's my schedule, right? I selected this first schedule. I want a list of the courses, and here it is, selecting courses from courses. It's doing an inner join, right? That'll give you a PTSD migraine, writing joins on SQL. So inner join course schedules on courses ID is equal to courses schedules. Course ID where course schedules is schedule ID limit 1, right? But why is this not?
Plus equals to append to that array, right? Of courses, because it's going to be an array of courses.
Yes. Accepts nested attributes. I may be barking up the wrong tree with this. Nested attributes allow you to save attributes on associated records through the parent. By default, nested attribute updating is turned off, and you can enable it using the accepts nested attributes for class method. Okay, so I probably don't want to be able to create a schedule from my courses, although maybe I will. Oops. Accepts. Well, let's go back to the original problem here, right, with our student and our schedule. Accepts nested attributes for schedule. All right, so let's try to create a new student here. Rails C. Okay, so now I'm going to say at student is equal to student.create. And we'll say first name is Jim, and last name is Smith. I think of the most boring imaginary names. Okay? All right, so we had a Jim Smith. And now I want to create a schedule for Jim Smith. So now I want to be able to say is at student.schedule term. Okay, didn't like that. Okay, at student schedule. No, because then we're going to have a new instance of student that points at a schedule create method. At student all. Okay, so we got at student find to. So that's good old Jim. Student.schedule, right? There it's looking for it. Oh, see, so when it returns that nil value, it's nilling out everything. Right, but what surprises me is that once that gets returned as nil, it won't execute a query. I think we can do student reload. Yeah, schedule, and then it will try to query again. All right. But why is this not letting me set these attributes? I think it's going to still give me the same complaint. God, I hate it when my brain does this. Schedule expected got term, which is an instance of hash. Schedule. Yeah, let's try it. Let's try it. I think you're right.
Because schedule, if it's nil.
Helps if I type things correctly. Okay. So at student is equal to Jim at student.schedule. Jim now has a schedule at student.schedule.term. Fall 2017. Okay. Must be just like some leaky, loose JavaScript parts in my brain that wants to just be able to do that assignment directly there without calling schedule new. Right? And even if Tarun hadn't been here, I think I would have probably gotten it when I tried to pass this in, right? Where we get this association type mass image. Schedule expected got term fall 2017, which is an instance of hash, right? Questions? Like 7 minutes. Schedule.courses?
You should be able to do that, right?
Yeah. Do we have any courses? We've got one course. We'll take it.
But this is associated with that schedule.
No, not yet. That's what I'm going to try to do. So at course, so this is not going to work, but it'll give us a good starting place tomorrow. So I got at student dot schedule dot courses. Yep.
So now you just append to that the course number 1.
Course find 1.
Plus equal, right? Or however you append to it an array, it's an array. That's why.
Right, yeah, it wants multiple of these things. So
So you can just put that in an array.
I think so. Boom. All right. So now we can find out at student.schedule.courses. Right? So now we've got at student.courses.subject, although this is going to throw an error because this is a collection, right? So we need to do at student.schedule.courses.each do course, and we can do, shit. Course, then we can do course.subject. No, not quite here either. No. Missing my hotkeys. Course.subject meets in course.location. Oh, except it would help to actually have something like puts there, right? Go up to the front here. So it won't let me do my Control A puts end. Okay. ITMD 413, and I don't even think this is the right room, but so don't show up there tomorrow unless that is this room, right? Okay. So this is a ton of ground that we covered today. The takeaways, hopefully, with the where do I start, this is where you want to start. Figuring out what you're modeling. This is very complex what we did here. I think having 2 models associated with each other in some way is plenty for your alpha app, right? Without doing this. But I also tried to model the process of figuring out, like, where you think, oh, well, we'll just have a students and they'll have a schedule, and then you start to see that, well, a schedule is actually made up of more moving parts. I highly recommend before you start writing migrations and models and things like that, if you sketch stuff out like this, post it to Basecamp or just write it out and say, this is what I'm thinking, so that you can get some feedback on what it is that you're trying to model from people before you start to go wild on it. And of course, as you're starting to create this stuff. Yeah, Dean?
So after we've modeled it, and we're ready to do the scaffold phase, if we know here's some things in the model we're going to want later, but they're not part of the MVP, do we include them in this scaffold command, just leave them empty for now? Or?
You won't, once you've generated your own models, you will not use the scaffold command. Okay. Because the scaffold command is going to generate another model for you. So what you'll end up doing is running the scaffold controller command. Or you'll just do Rails G controller, and then you just tell it. So you would say Rails G controller, and we would do something like schedule controller, and then we would do something like our methods here. So we would do index, show, destroy, something like that. And then that would allow us to then quickly generate a controller that does that. You can also do that scaffold controller, which will put in your CRUD methods. I'd need to check the API documentation on that before I start even writing pseudocode here on the command line. Okay, but let's not worry about controllers this week. Let's worry purely about the models, right? And then tomorrow we'll get to actually testing all this stuff. I'll come in with how we go about writing some seed data for doing all these complex models so that we can immediately jump in and have some students, have some courses, have some schedules, and then be able to run all of our validations on this stuff. Sound good? All right. Get out and enjoy that day.
Back to homework.
Yeah, back to homework.
Do you know if anyone uses this room app today? Or?
I don't know. The IIT online guy usually just comes in here and grabs the microphone and stuff and runs. So I'm guessing if you want to hang out and work, that's fine. I have to get to an appointment on the north side, so I can't stay.
One other quick question. Have you ever heard the term RTFM?
Read the friendly manual.
Bye, thank you.
Friendly?
You're welcome.
That's one way of putting it.
Right?
Since you're always documentation, I wanted to make sure you
Read the